What do you say to a woman with two black eyes?" asked Michael. "I don't know. Can I get you some ice?" replied Patrick. "Shall I call the police?" asked Bobby Hunt. "You don't say anything. You've already told her twice," Michael said with a grin. Patrick looked at Bobby, then shook his head. Bobby's eyes reflected his disgust. "Really? This joke?" thought Patrick to himself. Ever since Patrick met Tiffany James, he'd lived in the shadow of her absentee father. Everything Patrick did, her daddy could do better. Any accomplishments of Pam's daughter were ridiculed. Any attempts to befriend the girl were thwarted. Any attempts by Patrick to soften the girl's icy demeanor were rejected. 7 years of putting up with her is over, thank God, Patrick consoled himself as he sipped his beer. "What's this about, huh?" shouted Michael, trying to be heard over the loud music. "Drink, drink, it's a bachelor party." Bobby thanked his future father-in-law by drinking his Jack and Coke, but Patrick paid him no attention. He focused on one of the big screen televisions showing highlights of the college games. The screen displayed the final score of a game between Missouri River State and Mindy, with Missouri River State beating Mindy 8-7. The Mindy Blue Jays were a tough team, and beating them in their own stadium was no easy feat. Patrick watched as the Blue Jays blocked a field goal attempt with 53 seconds left in the game, bringing the score to 6 for the Pioneers and 7 for the Blue Jays. The Pioneers kicker then moved the ball to the 3-yard line. The Blue Jays punted the ball away, and 5 Pioneers converged to take down the Blue Jay quarterback in his own end zone. "And that, Pioneers, oh Pioneers, is the way to do it," Patrick said as the Pioneers took a knee and played the match to the end. "Like I said Saturday, you beat her up, with a nice thick belt or a razor, whether she deserves it or not." Michael grinned. "Like that, she knows who's in charge." "Ask him how well it works," Patrick reminded Bobby. Michael looked grimly at the man who had married his ex-wife. "You hear you're getting married, honey?" cooed the dancer, putting her arm around Bobby's shoulders. "Tell him, honey. Tell him not to do that." Michael laughed. Patrick knew he wouldn't be walking Tiffany James down the aisle. That honor was reserved for Sean, her older brother, and Patrick was more than fine with that. Sean was a fine young man, the kind any mother and stepfather would be proud to call their son and stepson. 5 weeks ago, Pam excitedly reported that Michael had contacted his youngest daughter out of the blue. "Isn't that great, honey?" exclaimed Pam. "Just out of nowhere? Wow, that's something," Patrick agreed. He thought it was very frustrating for Michael that he couldn't help when Debbie, Pam's oldest child, was getting married. Pam's brother, Al, was the one who walked a radiant Debbie down the aisle. Al, who was diabetic and weighed 370 pounds at the time of Debbie's wedding, had deteriorated rapidly since then and was now lying in a hospital bed in his Chicago home. He would not be attending his youngest niece's wedding. After learning that Tiffany's father would be walking her down the aisle, Bobby quickly asked Sean to be one of his groomsmen. Bobby also extended the invitation to Patrick. He genuinely liked Patrick, as did Debbie and Sean. Tiffany, however, protested loudly and vehemently against Patrick Davis being part of the wedding ceremony. "Bobby, thank you, but I consider it an honor to accompany the beautiful mother of the bride," Patrick said generously to the young man. If Tiffany had objected, Patrick wouldn't have insisted, but the girl kept her mouth shut. After all, it was her mother and stepfather who had paid for this elaborate wedding. Michael needed to borrow money for a ticket to Chicago. Pam even suggested that she and Patrick invite Michael to stay at their house, but Sean was quick to intervene and suggested that his father stay at his apartment. As they were being fitted for their morning suits and hats, Patrick learned that he was to pay for the rental of outfits for his wife's ex-husband. "And this perpetually unemployed, chronically lazy asshole suddenly shows up?" Patrick asked Pam. Pam ignored Patrick's question. When he rolled over in bed and tried to make love, she coldly brushed him off. "You need a drink," Michael yelled in Patrick's ear, bringing him out of his reverie. "Dude, do you need to yell in my ear?" shouted Patrick. "Come on, drink up," shouted Michael. "Dad, let's go," Sean said. "Are they real?" asked Michael.
Dad, let's go, Sean said.
Barely had the ink dried on his doctoral degree from Missouri River State University when Patrick Davis attended an engineering conference in Chicago, Illinois. Armed with several copies of his resume in his briefcase and a cover letter ready to be customized on his laptop, the 26-year-old networked diligently. Despite his PhD, he realized he still had a lot to learn. Admitting this to a fellow attendee led Patrick to an interview with Colfax Sewage and Water. Initially, he hadn't considered working in a small city. His ambitions aimed at Chicago, St. Louis, or another major metropolitan area. Most of Colfax is still living on septic tanks from the 50s and 60s, said Jack Warner. The transition to public sewer won't be easy, but it's a great opportunity for you to learn and grow. Patrick agreed. It would be a great opportunity. On his first day in the new office, Patrick met Pam, the vice president in charge of public relations and marketing. The 42-year-old woman greeted the newcomer warmly and wished him luck. Later, he ran into her in the dining room and politely asked if he could join her. He noticed the wedding and engagement rings she wore, but didn't bother to hide his attention. Patrick, standing 6 feet 1 inch tall, had entered college on a partial scholarship as a player for the Pioneers. After earning his bachelor's degree, he quit soccer and focused on graduate school, specializing in hydraulic engineering. He continued to exercise and diet, maintaining an athletic physique. He had worn his sandy blonde hair in a ponytail through his master's and doctoral programs, but cut it into a stylish buzz cut after graduating, donating his hair to the Locks of Love Foundation. His brown eyes were warm, his nose firm, and his smile, thanks to orthodontic braces, was even and white. He had refused his dentist's suggestion to remove his third canine, seeing no good reason for the extraction. "So, how long have you worked here?" Patrick asked Pam the next time their lunch breaks coincided. "Started? Oh my God, I'm embarrassed to tell you," Pam laughed. "Why?" asked Patrick. "Then you'll know how old I am," Pam admitted. Patrick noticed a few gray strands in her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun. He also saw crow's feet beginning to form at the corners of her beautiful blue eyes. She had a thin nose and lips shaped like Cupid's bow. "I started working right out of high school while pregnant with Debbie, my oldest daughter. Jack's daddy, Chip Warner, really liked me and paid for me to go to night school," Pam said, leaning forward and giving Patrick an unobstructed view of her lacy black bra. The attractive brunette had soft, creamy skin. Patrick tried not to stare, but found it difficult. "But 24 years, 3 children, and 1 divorce later," Pam continued, and Patrick realized he'd been distracted, lost in her cleavage. "So, next year is your silver anniversary? Wow, that's really an accomplishment to be proud of," Patrick said. "So you were really paying attention," Pam muttered. Patrick blushed, smiled, and shrugged. 2 weeks after he started at the office, Pam made it clear that she wasn't married. The rings were just to keep the wolves at bay. She gestured to Patrick's left hand, subtly indicating her interest. "On top of that, I paid for those rings myself," Pam said. "The one my husband gave me had such a small diamond that I needed a magnifying glass to see it. And then it turned out it wasn't even real, just cubic zirconia. So I paid for these. I'm wearing them." She confessed that she'd caught Michael in bed with the girl they'd hired to tutor their youngest, Tiffany, in French. They'd gone to counseling, almost repaired the damage, and then Lori announced she was pregnant. "She was 3 months pregnant," Pam smirked. "And what's the problem? I caught them 5 months earlier. The only way she could have been 3 months pregnant is if they kept doing it." "So, if I invite you to House of May?" asked Patrick. "I'd say that's very flattering, but you need to find someone your own age," Pam said. Then began the weekly campaign. Despite using direct deposit, pay stubs were still delivered to the office in sealed envelopes. Patrick would bring his paycheck stub to Pam's office, bang on the door jamb, and show her his receipt. "Just got my paycheck," he'd say. "Want to turn on the fancy light?" She'd smile dazzlingly at him and shake her head. Then Tiffany threw one of her tantrums. She wanted to take horseback riding lessons, but Pam, as the sole breadwinner, was already paying the mortgage, the car, and Sean's tuition. Call Dad. Maybe he can afford it, Pam suggested, while trying to put on her earrings and fit into her shoes. Ha ha! Very funny, Tiffany quipped. What? Asked Pam. Pam didn't know it, but Michael had been fired from yet another job. Tiffany was sure her mother was just emphasizing what a loser her beloved father had been. Still reeling from the fight with her 14-year-old daughter, Pam clicked her mouse, watching the cursor move across the screen. There was a knock on the door. Hey, just got my paycheck, Patrick smiled, waving an envelope with a pay stub. Want to go lantern riding? You know what? She can look after herself, Pam said. Yeah, pick me up at 7:30. Their first meeting had not been very warm. Patrick knocked on the door, and the teenager opened it with a jerk. They stared at each other for a long time, him smiling, her eyes glittering. Hi, I'm Patrick Davis, he smiled. Is Pam ready? Getting no answer, Tiffany slammed the door shut. Mom, she shouted. Jesus, what? Shouted Pam back. Some loser at the door, Tiffany said. Find out what they want. If it's Patrick, tell him I'll be a few more minutes, Pam barked. No, Tiffany said and stomped off to her room. Patrick wondered if Pam might have given him the wrong address. He checked his phone, then remembered he hadn't asked for her number. Just as he was about to walk back to the car, the door swung open again. Hi, God. Sorry about that, Pam apologized as she opened the door. No problem. I get it. Patrick smiled. I was a teenager once, too. Uh-huh, Pam said, still upset by Tiffany's insufferable behavior. She poked her head back into the house and shouted up the stairs, Tiffany, I'm leaving. In her room, Tiffany heard her mom yelling something, but ignored it. An hour later, she got hungry and left her room. Mom? She called out. Mom? At the steakhouse, Pam laughed at the humorous story Patrick was telling about his first night of drinking. Apparently, you're not 21 until you risk alcohol poisoning, Patrick said. Really? The neighbor's cat? Pam giggled, then frowned as her cell phone rang. What? She hissed. What do you mean, what? Tiffany snorted. Where are you? I told you I had a date, Pam replied stiffly. A date? With that loser? Shouted Tiffany. Goodbye, Tiffany. I'm hanging up, said Pam. What about dinner? Shouted Tiffany. What am I supposed to eat? Eat cereal, said Pam. I'm hanging up. They continued talking and eating. Pam's phone rang twice more during the meal, and each time it was Tiffany. Pam ignored the calls. Tiffany picked up Pam's cell phone and blocked Patrick's number. Whenever Patrick showed up to ask Pam out, she would slam the door in his face without telling her mother he had been there. Eventually, Patrick helped Pam unblock his number and started calling as he pulled up in her driveway. When Tiffany slammed the door shut, Patrick would knock loudly until Pam answered. After their fifth date, they made love. Pam was very self-conscious about her 42-year-old body. Tiffany was furious about having to share breakfast with her mother's boyfriend. She stared at him hatefully throughout the entire meal of scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast, responding to any comments or questions with stony silence. You should forgive her, Pam said, casting a dagger-like glare at her defiant daughter. She's a teenager. I was one once, Patrick agreed. What time is the basketball game tonight, Tiffany? Asked Pam. Tiffany didn't answer. I asked you a question, Pam said through clenched teeth. It's right here on the calendar, Tiffany snapped. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. If you weren't so busy with your boyfriend, maybe you'd know about it, huh? Pam, said Patrick, feigning shock, you have another boyfriend. Well, I guess someone can just stay home and not go to their game, Pam called out as she climbed the stairs. A moment later, Tiffany's door slammed shut. I think I'd better leave, Patrick said quietly. You two need to talk, don't you? Pam kissed him tenderly at the door. Then, when the sound of Patrick's car faded away, she started up the stairs. As their relationship progressed, despite Tiffany's unreasonable and unrelenting hostility, Patrick's role in the company grew. He was assigned the biggest project they had, North Lake Hospital. The main challenge, besides the sewer system, was draining the parking lot and the area around the 115-year-old building. Patrick designed and led the installation project. He surprised and delighted the hospital administration by managing the installation of the drainage system with minimal disruption to hospital operations. However, the resurfacing of the parking lot required using union labor, which added complexity to the project. Thanks to the employees and union bosses, the realization went off without a hitch. With the $12,000 bonus Jack Warner gave him, Patrick bought an engagement ring for Pam. During a romantic dinner at the Monticello restaurant, Patrick proposed, and she tearfully but happily agreed. Debbie and Sean were happy for their mother. Both met Patrick at Thanksgiving dinner and seemed to like him. They also tried to reason with Tiffany about Patrick and their mother's need for companionship. Tiffany was polite to Patrick and her mother during dinner, but as soon as she could, she retreated to her room. "Give her time," Sean said. "The kid just doesn't like to share," Debbie suggested. Debbie stayed with Tiffany while Patrick and Pam went on their honeymoon to the Grand Canyon. During their absence, Debbie tried to talk some sense into Tiffany. Sean visited often and also tried to convince her to give Patrick a chance. Tiffany stubbornly refused, unwilling to accept Patrick as part of the family. "Look, Tiffany, I know you're too young to remember all those tears, Daddy cheating on Mommy," Debbie snapped at her. "Because it never happened," Tiffany retorted. While dating Pam, Patrick could leave when Tiffany's bitterness became unbearable. But being married and living in the same house with her, he had nowhere to escape. His car and Pam's car became the cleanest in the neighborhood, as Patrick washed, cleaned, and vacuumed them whenever Tiffany's behavior became too confrontational. Their garden became the envy of the neighbors. When he ran out of things to wash or wax, he would start weeding the garden. He learned how to mulch, which flowers bloomed when, and cleared the cluttered front yard. Pam couldn't bring herself to put Tiffany in her place. She didn't side with the girl, but she wouldn't side with Patrick either. Then the rain came. It wasn't a light drizzle that quickly evaporated, nor a heavy downpour that soon dried up. This rain continued for almost 4 days in a row, a steady, unceasing torrent that relentlessly poured down. In 91 hours, 38 inches of rain fell on Colfax, Missouri. The ground became saturated, and when the rain had nowhere to run off, the streets turned into rivers. Low-lying houses flooded, and residents had to be rescued. North Lake Hospital's parking lot turned into a lake. Supplies had to be airlifted in, no patients could leave, and no new patients could be admitted. Patrick Davis took the brunt of the blame for the malfunctioning drainage system at the hospital. Pointing out that no one's drainage system worked during the rainstorm did little to appease the hospital administration. Colfax Water and Sewage shrugged sympathetically, but ultimately fired Patrick. Tiffany's face lit up with joy when she heard about Patrick's dismissal. She wasted no time in reminding her mother that now Patrick, once the breadwinner, was just an unemployed freeloader, leaving Pam to support him. Patrick found himself out of work far longer than he had expected. Weeks turned into months as he diligently searched for a new job. Throughout this time, Tiffany continued her barrage of insults and snide remarks, and Pam never once defended him. If Pam ever denied Tiffany's requests, Tiffany blamed Patrick for their financial woes. In St. Angelo, Illinois, a nascent public water system project presented Patrick with an opportunity. It involved forming an irrigation cooperative to serve the entire rural community. The job was in the public sector, so the annual salary was nearly $7,000 less than his previous position. Nevertheless, it was steady employment. Like you're the one who made it rain, huh?" Bert Yates quipped when Patrick candidly explained the circumstances of his firing. "I agree, but I was the one who designed the drainage system," Patrick affirmed to the county commissioner. The commute now required 2.5 hours each way, but Patrick humorously remarked that it was 5 hours a day he didn't have to endure Tiffany's outbursts. Tiffany herself seemed to acknowledge this, as their confrontations were mostly confined to weekends. Due to the long drives, Patrick opted to purchase a modified Harley-Davidson Fat Boy lowrider. It was more fuel-efficient and enjoyable to ride in favorable weather conditions. Pam strongly disliked the bike, citing its noise and perceived danger. Patrick even joked that he might consider selling the Harley once Pam found a way to get rid of Tiffany. Pam also argued that the Harley constituted an unnecessary expense given Patrick's reduced salary. Any savings on fuel were offset by higher insurance costs. He finally persuaded Pam to hop onto the back seat of the motorcycle, and they set off for a ride. Starting off cautiously, he rode slowly to let her adjust to the bike. Gradually, he increased their speed. On the highway, he had no choice but to open the throttle to its fullest and race down the road. After safely returning to their suburban home, Pam didn't waste any time. She didn't wait for them to pull out of the garage. Meanwhile, Tiffany graduated from high school and entered adulthood. She excelled academically, earning academic scholarships from 5 colleges and athletic scholarships from 2 colleges due to her basketball skills. Patrick fervently hoped Tiffany would choose Norman College in Low Ridge, Texas, or the University of Louisiana at DeGard, both far from home. To influence her decision, he even mentioned that Missouri River State, his alma mater, was conveniently close in Colfax. Harvesters College, also in Colfax, offered another option where she could stay home rather than live independently. Much to Patrick's surprise and dismay, Tiffany decided to enroll at Missouri River State after all. With a chuckle, she assured Patrick that his affiliation with the school played no role in her decision. "It's probably because of Bobby," Pam suggested. "I don't know who this Bobby guy is, but I hate him," Patrick grumbled to himself. However, after meeting Bobby Hunt, Patrick's feelings toward the young man changed. In fact, he found himself liking Bobby. Bobby, in turn, seemed to reciprocate the sentiment. The two men even belted out the Pioneers' fight song together in the living room, each trying to outdo the other. "It's a man thing, honey," Pam giggled, watching Patrick and Bobby sing. "Next thing you know, they'll start pulling each other's fingers." "Hey, Bobby, pull my finger, huh?" Patrick quipped. "Of course, Pioneer. Oh, Pioneer." Bobby responded with a chuckle, extending his finger towards Patrick. "That's enough, you two," Tiffany interjected sharply. "Remember courtship? It's the best thing in life," Patrick teased Bobby. "What? What does that mean?" Tiffany snapped at Patrick. Fast forward 3 years, and Patrick found himself sitting in a bar with Bobby, Sean, and a few others from the groom's company, along with Tiffany's father. Patrick genuinely welcomed Bobby's proposal to Tiffany. Despite their rocky past, Tiffany was elated as she proudly showed off her engagement ring, even managing a hesitant thank you to Patrick when he congratulated her. Patrick wisely kept his distance, understanding that Pam and Tiffany were calling the shots for the wedding arrangements. The only suggestion Patrick dared to make was that they wait until after college to tie the knot. Tiffany's response was a cutting remark about him meddling in her affairs, followed by a disapproving look from Pam. "No, you're right," Patrick acquiesced before quietly exiting the room. "Better marry him now before he figures out what a hateful little shit you really are," Patrick muttered under his breath as he closed the door to the master bathroom. When Michael miraculously reached out for his baby, both Pam and Tiffany couldn't contain their excitement. "Wow, that's really something," Patrick remarked casually. "Unexpected, huh?" Upon meeting Michael, Patrick wasn't initially impressed. Michael and Pam had raised 3 handsome young men, each seeming to possess good judgment. Tiffany, while intelligent, didn't always show the same level of practicality. The first time Michael visited, Pam wore a red dress that Patrick had only seen twice before, once at Christmas and again at their office holiday party. "I remember this from Christmas," Patrick commented as Pam emerged from the closet. The next occasion was on their wedding anniversary. "I remembered how much you loved that dress," Pam smiled, meeting Patrick at the House of May restaurant. "Happy anniversary to me." Patrick chuckled in agreement. Now she slipped into the dress, grumbling about the few extra pounds she had gained since the last time she wore it. "Where are we headed?" Patrick asked as Pam hopped around, struggling to put on her shoes. "Tiffany, Michael, and I are meeting to discuss the wedding," Pam replied. "What should I wear?" Patrick gestured to his usual office attire, pants and a shirt. "Honey, Tiffany's father will be there," Pam said, meeting Patrick's gaze. She lightly kissed him on the lips. And let's be honest, she muttered, you're not Tiffany's favorite person. And that's the dress you're meeting your ex-husband in? Patrick raised an eyebrow. Let him see what he threw away, huh? Pam smirked. No, Patrick retorted sharply. He doesn't need to see what he threw away. He knows what he lost. Ignoring Patrick's protests, Pam hurried out of the room. Moments later, the garage door slammed shut. With Pam absent to voice her objections, Patrick decided to visit the Rooster Pool, a gentleman's club, where he indulged in a half-pound hamburger with onion rings, atomic fries, and a cold draft beer. The strawberry blonde dancer on stage exuded confidence, her movements accentuating her allure. Anything else, cowboy? Asked an attractive Asian-American waitress with a friendly smile. Do you have any more peppermint pie? Patrick inquired. Even after savoring a large slice of peppermint pie and 2 mugs of freshly brewed coffee, Patrick returned home before Pam and Tiffany. He watched some television, finding nothing particularly captivating. Pam eventually arrived home without Tiffany, and she was in a determined mood. Shedding her dress, she was left only in thigh-length stockings and tiny lace panties. Initially, Patrick considered resisting Pam's advances, but the sight of her in stockings and panties dispelled any thoughts of restraint. Over the following weeks, Pam, Tiffany, and Michael convened more frequently to plan the wedding. Each time, Pam dressed meticulously, applying her makeup with extra care. Dinner meetings often stretched into late hours, with Pam sometimes returning home well past 10:30 or 10:45. The one occasion Patrick had joined them had been a notably uncomfortable affair. Pam, Tiffany, and Michael had conversed intensely, pointedly excluding Patrick from their discussions. Twice during dinner, Patrick attempted to interject his thoughts or suggestions, only to have Pam squeeze his hand tightly. Patrick, honey, Michael's speaking, she whispered. And Michael's mistaken, Patrick muttered under his breath. We've already signed with Anne-Marie's floral design. Patrick received a reproachful glance from both Pam and Tiffany when he inquired about Bobby's absence. After all, it was Bobby's wedding. The smirk Michael shot his way ignited a core of anger within Patrick. Unlike previous occasions, Pam showed no inclination for intimacy after the dinner meeting. However, she did make it clear to Patrick that his presence and interruptions were unwelcome. Don't worry, it won't happen again, Patrick shrugged, though he felt a pang of disappointment. He knew winning Tiffany over was an impossible task. In the eyes of a spoiled child, he could never measure up to her father. Strangely, it seemed he was also trying to win over Pam, trying to match Michael James, and Patrick couldn't compete in his wife's eyes. During one of the dinner meetings, just before the bachelor party, Pam called Patrick on his cell phone. Honey, in the desk, in the top drawer, can you check if we ordered for 50 or 60 people? She asked. Patrick walked to her home office, opened the desk drawer, and found the contract she referred to. Reading the contents aloud to her, he replied with a nonchalant, "Uh-huh," as she thanked him cheerfully. Beneath the bill for Tiffany's wedding dress, Patrick discovered an astonishing sum. Below the bill for the mother of the bride's dress, beneath the catering contract, lay an invoice and statement from a private investigator. Reading the report, Patrick learned that Pam had hired the firm to locate Tiffany's father. It had taken them 4 days. Pam had very little information about the man. Michael James apparently believed that a computer was sufficient for watching adult content and had no social media presence. He's socially inept, too, Patrick muttered to himself as he microwaved dinner. Why would Pam lie? Michael didn't just reappear. She went searching for him, Patrick mused to himself. The evening of the rehearsal and subsequent dinner was an exercise in diplomacy for Patrick Davis. If the dinner meeting and bachelor party had seemed pompous to him, the rehearsal and subsequent dinner reinforced his impression. At the rehearsal dinner, Tiffany, Pam, and Michael were seated with Bobby, Bobby's stepfather and mother, and Bobby's stepmother and father. Their table was slightly elevated above the others. Patrick found himself at a table with Pam's daughter-in-law, Meg Wooten, and Meg and Al's daughter, Bernice. Bernice had Down syndrome, ate heartily, and insisted on conversing with Patrick while chewing her food. Debbie and Sean apologized to Patrick for the seating mix-up. "I honestly thought you'd be at the main table," Sean muttered, glancing toward the elevated seating. "I don't want to be there," Patrick stated loudly. "Apparently, there's no room for me." He clapped Sean lightly on the shoulder. "Make sure your mom gets home, okay?" he added before walking out of the restaurant. Sean tried to reprimand his mother for the rude behavior displayed by her, Tiffany, and Michael. "And sticking him with Bernice," Sean said, his voice filled with contempt. "Seriously? She's my cousin, and even I wouldn't want to sit with her." "Honey, it's Tiffany's dinner," Pam said weakly. "I had nothing to do with the seating." "But you saw what was happening and should have done something," Sean snapped aback. In front of her house, Sean looked at Pam, and silence stretched on for several minutes. "May I remind you that I'm your mother?" Pam retorted, feeling ashamed of her inattention. "And you don't act like it," Sean replied. "I'll make it up to him after the wedding," Pam said defensively. "I don't see how you can," Sean replied. "Just a few more hours and it will be over," Pam said, heading for the front door. The next morning, Patrick stayed out of the way of Tiffany, the hairdresser, the attendant, and Pam, all of whom were running around, yelling and whining. He drank a cup of coffee and ate a bagel on the back porch, staying out of the chaos. "Honey," exclaimed Pam, opening the door, "you're not even dressed? The wedding's at—" "It takes me 5 minutes to get dressed," Patrick replied. It actually took 9 minutes. There were pins stuck in everything, and Patrick made sure he removed them all before he got dressed. Then he sat and waited for almost an hour. Just as he was about to take off his shoes and coat, the photographer insisted on taking a few shots with the bride and the bride's mother. Either the photographer didn't notice, or she had already taken what she wanted from Tiffany. But there was no comment on Patrick's clearly extended middle finger when he posed with Tiffany. "Smile, sir. It's almost over," the photographer joked as Patrick stood with a beaming Pam. "Yes, it is," Patrick agreed, smiling sadly. The limo delivered them to the chapel. Patrick got out, ignoring Michael, Tiffany, and Pam. When Michael moved to help Pam from the back seat, Patrick forcefully elbowed him aside. "My wife, not yours," he muttered, glaring at him. "Honey, please," Pam growled at Patrick. The photographer asked them to smile, and they did, but the smiles looked more like grimaces. Inside the building, the photographer again asked them to smile. Both controlled their emotions and complied. Patrick nodded to Bobby and looked around the building. "Beautiful job on this place," Patrick praised. "Indeed," Pam agreed. "Hey, watch my hat, huh?" Patrick said, stepping away from the bench. "Honey, it's about to start," Pam complained as the music reached a climax. "And I'm about to pee on my leg," Patrick said. "Just watch my hat, huh?" He quickly headed toward the front of the church, then stepped out into the hallway just as the first bridesmaids and groomsmen began walking down the aisle. He took one last look around, and then went outside. His motorcycle was parked where he had left it the night before, under a tarp. Patrick had driven it there after a bad rehearsal dinner and then taken an Uber home. He pulled off the tarp, took the keys out of his pocket, and started the bike. Inside the church, the organ music drowned out the roar of Patrick's Harley as he drove away. Pam was not smiling and was quite annoyed with her husband when the doors opened, revealing her daughter in Michael James's arms. Patrick should have been there with her, celebrating this moment. At the house, Patrick disentangled himself from the rented outfit, carefully placed it back in its plastic pouch, and then sent Pam a text message reminding her to bring home his hat. Patrick rolled the 4 suitcases up to the front door. He had packed them while everyone else fussed about trying to get ready for the wedding. He smiled, strained. Tiffany had borrowed the suitcases and packed them for her and Bobby's honeymoon in Barbados. Those were his suitcases. He'd had them since before he and Pam started dating. Pam had no right to give Tiffany permission to take them. Tiffany hadn't even bothered to ask Patrick, but had simply turned to her mother. Patrick neatly stacked all the contents on Tiffany's bed. He didn't do anything to the clothes, didn't mess with Tiffany's makeup, and didn't even touch the birth control pills. Patrick looked around one last time. He picked up the framed photograph from Pam's wedding that adorned his dresser. He clutched it under his arm as he walked down the stairs. Then, Patrick decided he didn't need it. He didn't need a reminder of his failure. He placed it face down on the kitchen table, setting it on the chair he usually sat at. "Goodbye, Pam," he said to the empty house, then rolled the suitcases to his truck. The bike was already on the trailer. Patrick checked everything again, then made sure the front door was locked and the alarm was on. He dropped the house keys in the front door mailbox and walked on Tiffany's bed. He didn't do anything to the clothes, didn't mess with Tiffany's makeup, and didn't even touch the birth control pills. Patrick looked around one last time. He picked up the framed photograph from Pam's wedding that adorned his dresser. He clutched it under his arm as he walked down the stairs. Then, Patrick decided he didn't need it. He didn't need a reminder of his failure. He placed it face down on the kitchen table, setting it on the chair he usually sat at. "Goodbye, Pam," he said to the empty house, then rolled the suitcases to his truck. The bike was already on the trailer. Patrick checked everything again, then made sure the front door was locked and the alarm was on. He dropped the house keys in the front door mailbox and walked down to his truck. "Take care," said Old Man Carmichaels, walking slowly past with his ancient beagle. "Same to you, sir," Patrick said. St. Elizabeth Parish Water and Sewage hired Patrick after a phone interview conducted on the recommendation of Bert Yates. He was also hired by the University of Louisiana at DeGard to teach a graduate course on irrigation systems. St. Elizabeth's Trauma Center did not seem to know about Patrick's failure with North Lake Hospital's drainage system. Patrick was commissioned to design the system as part of the hospital's expansion. Joe Goday was a good man, and he too had a modified Fat Boy, a lowrider a year older than Patrick's. Brian Bro, Patrick's immediate supervisor, was a quiet, brooding man. Patrick saw a fair amount of sadness in his eyes. Patrick didn't bother to ask Brian what the point of his story was, and Brian didn't ask Patrick what his story was. The Dead End Bar had cold beer and some of the most delicious plate lunches Patrick had ever tasted. The girls who twirled and danced on the small stage were amazing and real beauties. In the evenings, Sweet Pea served a hearty meal that made Patrick groan with pleasure as he struggled to finish the delicious dishes. He jokingly asked a very large woman if the cook was available. The woman gave him a hard look and then smiled. "They're both unmarried girls, I take it. If you marry one, you'll have to take the other," she said. "Well, Mom, I don't think I'm man enough to take them both," Patrick said. "That's for sure," the woman grinned and greeted the new arrival. Patrick took off his wedding ring the night before Tiffany's wedding. Pam hadn't noticed that he wasn't wearing the ring. It was now lying in a dresser drawer, hidden from view. It wasn't visible, but even as it lay under the sweaters in the drawer, Patrick thought about that ring. Apparently, he and Pam were still married. When he left Colfax, Missouri, he left no address, but he also made no attempt to conceal his whereabouts. Patrick Davis often wondered why he hadn't been man enough to win Pam away from Michael James. Michael had lied to Pam, cheated on her constantly, spent most of her money, and then shirked all responsibilities to her and their children. Yet, Pam had spent almost $4,000 to track this man down. When he came back to town, Pam seemed to want to spend every possible minute with this scraggly sociopath. She resented Patrick's intrusion and certainly didn't like his opinion of Michael. After finishing his stuffed pork chops, Patrick paid the bill, left a tip, and returned to his one-bedroom apartment. His father once remarked that, as a laborer moving from field to field, he could pack up his entire apartment in 30 minutes or less when he had to move to his next job. Looking over his meager belongings, Patrick figured it would take him just as long to pack. "Maybe if I stopped to make a sandwich," Patrick thought, turning on the small lamp over the small dining table. He was grading the thesis of one of his students. Louise. If you do that, you'll contaminate your water with paddlefish," Patrick thought, circling the offending paragraph. "We can't just look at where the water comes from. We have to look at where that water is going to go." He found a few more glaring problems in the girl's proposal and circled them. Then, using a red pen, he wrote detailed comments about each problem and why he would not approve her thesis. Patrick knew that Louise Proust would protest loudly, angrily defending her position. He also knew he would point out that her arguments were better suited for a different forum. Then she would likely take her complaint to Dean Melançon. If that decrepit old fart really did have a backbone, Louise would go to Dean Sims. But Miss Louise Proust did not rewrite her dissertation or accept Patrick's critical remarks. It seemed she was determined to remain stubborn and combative. Exhausted, more by inner turmoil than physical exertion, Patrick went to bed. As on most nights, he wondered if he could have done otherwise. "One thing you can do is start taking action," Patrick said aloud. "Stop wondering when she's going to sue you. Let her sue you." But Patrick knew he wouldn't do that. As he had expected, Miss Proust was furious that he had not accepted her thesis. Patrick was even amused when she pointed out that she had double-spaced her work, ensured the pages were properly tabulated, and set the margins correctly. "Louise," he sighed. "Miss Proust," she snapped back. "Never mind," Patrick said, which only angered her more. "This isn't about your formatting. I'm taking issue with the sloppiness of your work. Dean Melançon read her thesis, reviewed Patrick's notes, and acknowledged the validity of his critiques. He refused to accept Louise's work. Dean Sims also reviewed her thesis and Patrick's notes, and suggested she redo her work. "Miss Proust," he sighed, "I'm no expert on irrigation, but even I can see the flaws in your work. Redo it and resubmit it." Patrick nodded approvingly when Dean Melançon and Dean Sims informed him of their decisions. Despite the support, he was still in a foul mood as he rolled into his office at St. Elizabeth's Water and Sewer. "Hey, Davis," Joe greeted him as Patrick started up his computer. "Hi," Patrick replied, typing in his password. "Is this a conference for engineers in Chicago?" Joe asked, pressing the issue. "It's about time, yeah, it's definitely time," Patrick said, glancing at the calendar on his desk. "I went last year, Brian the year before," Joe said with a knowing smile. "So now it's your turn in the trenches." Patrick recalled that it was at this convention where he met Jack Warner. Meeting Jack Warner led Patrick to Colfax Plumbing Systems, and being in Colfax introduced him to Pam. Joe smiled, remembering the sequence of events. Bert Yates had called him, saying Jack Warner was interested in Patrick. Jack Warner then contacted Joe, expressing his desire for Patrick to attend the convention. "We have a head of public relations and marketing? Worthless since Patrick left," Jack admitted. "Patrick is the best engineer we have, but you can see something is eating him up," Joe agreed. Patrick and the schematics he was working on for the new recycling plant proposed for Kimball, Louisiana. The look on Joe Godet's face made him realize this was about more than just a convention. "No," Patrick said, turning back to his schematics. "What?" Joe stuttered, genuinely shocked. "I'm not going to this convention," Patrick repeated, not looking away from the screen. "Send Brian, send Tim, send anyone but me." "Listen up," Joe snapped, genuinely angered by Patrick's refusal. "You insist on staying put? You'll get my resignation in the morning, Joe," Patrick sighed. "I've already sent the specs to Brian Brose." "You're going to quit?" Joe exclaimed indignantly. "Yes," Patrick sighed again. Joe stormed out of Patrick's office. He knew that if he stayed another minute with the defiant subordinate, he might say or do something he couldn't take back. Still fuming, he called Jack Warner. "I was really hoping to send Pam there, so they could be together again," Jack sighed. Joe said nothing, thinking Pam Davis must be having a hard time if she wanted such a miserable, stubborn man. "Please try to convince him," Jack pleaded. "If only he could see. I'm afraid she'll do something sooner or later." Joe took a drive around the DeGard neighborhood to clear his head. Finally, with a clearer mind, he returned to the office. "Patrick," Joe said in a calm, even tone, "look, I'd really appreciate it if you'd go to the convention. You've been there before. You know the drill, and as our best and brightest engineer, you'll be able to figure out exactly what we need here at St. Elizabeth's. Okay?" "No, Joe, no," Patrick sighed and took a screenshot of his work. He looked at his slowly blushing superior. No, Joe. Send me anywhere but Chicago, okay? Send me to hell if you want, but I absolutely refuse to go to Chicago, Patrick said quietly. Oakleaf County, Texas was in the early stages of designing and constructing a wastewater treatment plant. Patrick Davis was the engineering supervisor and often arrived at work before most of the midnight shift had left. By the time the day shift started, he was usually still sitting at his desk. Although he ate lunch every day in the employee cafeteria, he sat alone at noon. Patrick did not discourage employees from sitting with him, but he did not encourage them either. Every day at 4 p.m, he would go to the cafeteria, make himself a cup of coffee, then sit down, eat an apple, and drink his coffee. "Hey, Davis," Jason, the chief operating officer, called out one afternoon at 12:10. "Yes, sir?" Patrick asked, looking up from his peanut butter and jelly sandwich. "Boy, I know what your paycheck is," Jason joked, eyeing Patrick's simple meal. "I know we pay you enough to eat better than this." "But do you pay me enough to make me want to?" Patrick replied, a rare smile appearing on his face. "You taught at DeHart University, right?" Jason asked, sitting down at the table. "University of Louisiana at DeHarty," Patrick corrected. "Yeah, graduate school in irrigation systems and implementation." "Why?" "We had a student, let's see, Miss Proust? Louise Proust?" Jason asked. "Oh, good," Patrick groaned. "Of course you did." "Anything good?" Jason inquired. "Tell you what, Fasterling," Patrick said, picking up his sandwich again. "Have Miss Proust send you her supposed dissertation. Read it and let me know." At 4 p.m, Jason found Patrick back in the cafeteria, sinking his teeth deeply into an apple. "Good Lord, no," Patrick grinned. "This is nothing but 100% authentic Texas coffee. Thank you very much." Okay. Never could understand why someone would want to ruin such a great thing," Jason said, making himself some coffee. The man sat down next to Patrick again, and they sipped their coffee in silence. Then Jason sighed and looked at the spot over Patrick's shoulder. "Read this girl's thesis," Jason repeated. "She's worthless." "But it's formatted correctly," Patrick smirked. "What? Who cares?" Jason asked, taken aback. "But she has other criteria we need. How about we put her in the inventory department?" suggested the operations director. "What? You mean we're hiring her?" Patrick asked in surprise. Jason looked around the room. He decided that the 3 administrative assistants in the corner were too busy giggling to pay attention to them. He frowned as he looked at one of the trio, a young man with his hair arranged in a bouffant style. Jason leaned closer to Patrick. "Adams has it in her head that we lack variety," Jason whispered. "You told her I'm an African-American transgender lesbian," Patrick whispered back. "I had my suspicions," Jason grinned as he drained his cup of coffee. "Seriously," Jason said, standing up, "if you don't count your class, she scored a 4. Let's see what she can do for us, huh?" Louise Proust joined Oakleaf County Sewage Treatment in the inventory department. She spent her first day doing mountains of paperwork and reviewing the WebEx seminars that all new employees were required to take. It wasn't until the second day of work that she saw Patrick Davis. Patrick was shocked when the girl smiled broadly at him and waved hello. He did not respond to her smile, but he did wave back. Louise sat with several administrative assistants during lunch and seemed comfortable in their company. She didn't see Patrick again until it was time to leave the cafeteria. She smiled and waved at him again. Patrick nodded to acknowledge her and continued eating his pretzels. "Oh, it's Vinny," Troy Lopez wheezed. "I swear he's so unfriendly." "Troy thinks anyone who hasn't fallen madly in love with him is unfriendly," one of the girls whispered loudly to Louise. "I'm not even going to dignify that with a response," Troy said, stepping away from the table. Patrick watched this exchange and shook his head in mild disgust. He wondered if anyone would have the guts to tell Troy Lopez that he looked ridiculous with that bouffant hairdo. 2 weeks later, Troy Lopez was finally fired. The young man was hired as an administrative assistant, but whenever the job seemed too difficult, he simply ignored it. If he was given a deadline, Troy shifted the work to someone else. "I love him like a brother. complained Mia Sanchez to Coretta Adams, the general manager of Oakleaf County Sewage. But somebody needs to tell that boy to do his own work. You know what I'm saying. After the firing of Troy Lopez, Mia and several other administrative assistants found mountains of papers on their desks. Due to Troy's laziness, a lot of things had piled up, and most of them required time to sort through. So, at noon, Louise Proust found herself alone in the cafeteria. She decided to sit at Patrick's table. She sat down, started eating her tuna salad, and began texting on her cell phone. "That's rude," Patrick snapped after 10 minutes. "Huh?" Louise asked, finally tearing her gaze away from her cell phone screen. "You didn't even ask if you could join me. You just sat yourself down," Patrick snarled. "No, hey, how was your day? Nothing. You just pull out your phone and start texting someone else? If you're going to do that nonsense, why even sit here? You can text from any table in here." He got up and left the room before his anger took over, before he said something that could get him in trouble. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Patrick almost didn't go into the cafeteria. Then he reminded himself that he had every right to be there, every right to enjoy his apple and coffee. "Hello, Dr. Davis. May I sit down here?" asked Louise. "Sure," Patrick replied, managing a strained smile and taking a bite of his apple. "But you don't have to call me Dr. Davis anymore. Just Patrick." The girl smiled, and Patrick marveled at how attractive she really was. In his class, Louise Proust had dressed as boringly as possible. She kept her blonde hair in a tight bun or a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup. Her outfit was smart and fashionable. She wore a knee-length dark blue skirt paired with a pale yellow blouse. Her blonde hair cascaded down to her waist, styled loosely, and her makeup included light powder, eyeliner, and lip gloss. Patrick couldn't help but think that Troy Lopez was wearing more makeup than Louise at that moment. "So, when did you start working here?" Louise asked, sipping her coffee. "First week of June," Patrick replied. "I'm sure you had something to do with me getting this job," Louise whispered, looking at Patrick with warm brown eyes. Patrick gave her a wry smile. "Not really," he answered honestly. "A lot of it was due to the hard work you've done at ULD." She smiled proudly at his compliment, taking another sip of coffee and glancing at the apple Patrick was eating. "Where did you get the apple?" she asked, looking around the cafeteria. "From home," Patrick said. "Oh, where are you staying?" "I have an apartment, the the Oxbow on 72nd Street, Louise said. "I bought a condo, the East Lawn condos," Patrick replied. "East Lawn? Where's that?" Louise inquired. "On the other side of Oxbow Lake," Patrick explained. "From here, take a left on Marizelle, then another left on Tucker Drive." "So, you walk right past my apartment?" Louise noted. "Yeah, maybe I'll rev up the hog and wake you up," Patrick joked. "Your hog?" Louise asked, looking puzzled. "My Harley," Patrick clarified, finishing the last bite of his apple, along with the remainder of his coffee. "Do you still have one of those? I like the American flag coloring," Louise said. "Still got it," Patrick confirmed. She seemed like she wanted to say something more, but Patrick was already tossing back his coffee cup and disposing of the apple core. "See you later, Dr. Davis," Louise said as Patrick headed out. Later that day, Patrick had to coordinate a significant project, tearing out a section of Highway 72 and ordering 12-inch pipes to ensure they were ready for installation. The work would impact residents across Oakleaf County, necessitating careful logistics to have supplies ready at the job sites precisely when needed. 1 hour, just 1 hour delay, and we'll be in big trouble, Patrick emphasized as they finalized their project plans. "Ha ha, cute," Louise smirked. "What?" snapped Patrick. "Dip-to-dough," Louise chuckled. "We work at the sewage plant." "Miss Proust, there's a time for jokes and a time for seriousness. Guess which time this is," Patrick said sharply. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly brushed them away and clenched her jaws tightly. "Is the inventory ready to go?" he asked, shifting gears. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice shaking as she tried to regain composure. "Is the equipment ready?" Oh, Patrick turned to Pablo Resendez. "Yes, sir," Pablo affirmed. "Everything's loaded onto the trailers." "Have the permits come through?" Patrick questioned Jason Fosterling. And in Pablo's hand, Jason assured Patrick. And Miss Proust? Patrick addressed her again. She looked up from her papers, her eyes still glistening and her nose flushed. Yes, sir? She asked cautiously. Miss Proust, I apologize for coming down on you like that, Patrick said sincerely. I understand you were trying to lighten the mood, and I took it the wrong way. Louise glanced around the room, noticing the nods of understanding from Coretta Adams, Steve Adams, the CFO, no relation to Coretta, Pablo, and Jason. Thank you, Miss Proust, Patrick said as he gathered his papers. So, we'll all reconvene tomorrow at 9:30 after the morning rush hour settles down a bit. Patrick swiftly exited the conference room before anyone could respond. He didn't regret reprimanding Louise. The situation was critical, time-sensitive, and any distractions could jeopardize their relationship with Oakleaf County residents. Many were already disgruntled about the recent sales tax hike and the sewage system upgrades. Yeah, Pam taught me a few things, Patrick reflected with a strained smile. Picking up his helmet from the table, he and Pam had often discussed how a dissatisfied customer could significantly impact a business. Every happy customer tells maybe 2 or 3 of their friends, Pam had observed, but an unhappy one, they'll tell at least 10 people about it. Patrick did something unusual for him. He left the office early. He was still irked by Louise's earlier question about using a 12-inch pipe instead of an 18-inch one. It's only a few pennies more per foot, Louise remarked, and the volume is greater. Miss Proust, when we're dealing with miles of pipeline, those few pennies add up to thousands of dollars, Steve Adams interjected calmly. One more thing, Miss Proust, Patrick added, struggling to contain his frustration. Surely you understand how pipe diameter affects pressure and flow velocity? Instead of heading south on Highway 72, Patrick veered north, passing through Oakleaf without much notice of the trailer parks, shopping centers, and convenience stores along the way. He caught sight of Connolly College campus and the Cougar Stadium. Making a left onto Stadium Drive and then a right onto Connolly Way, he finally came to a rumbling stop in front of Tijuana Jack's restaurant. Tijuana Jack's boasted 3 virtues: ice-cold beer, Texas beautiful girls, and a flagrant disregard for Oakleaf County ordinances requiring dancers to cover certain parts. Patrick flashed his TJ pass to the doorman, who smiled and wished him a good day, opening the door to the squat building. On stage, a blonde danced to Pantera's Walk, playfully adjusting her panties as the song played out. She flashed a vacant smile as the next song started, striding across the stage in 5-inch heels. Another draw at Tijuana Jack was their half-pound hamburger served with a hefty portion of thick-cut fries dusted with cayenne. "Can I help you, buddy?" asked a grizzled man as Patrick settled onto a bar stool. "A draft and a burger with fries," Patrick ordered. "How do you want it cooked?" the man inquired. "Medium well," Patrick replied, though he expected it to come out well done regardless. The draft arrived promptly, and within minutes, the bartender placed a hefty platter before him. Patrick tore open a mustard packet, dipped the burger, and took a satisfying bite, a smile spreading across his face. "Enjoying that?" the bartender asked, chuckling. "Yeah," Patrick agreed, washing down his meal with the last of his beer. An Asian-American girl with ample assets worked the room, trying to entice patrons into the tequila room for a 15-minute session. "How much?" Patrick asked, though he had no intention of going to the tequila room. "$100 for the room and whatever you decide to tip the dancer," she whispered seductively in Patrick's ear. "And no one's ever complained," she added hotly. "Really? Is that so?" Patrick replied. He craved another mug of beer. He wanted to whisk away the blonde dancer who had been on the small stage when he entered the bar to the tequila room. There was a slight resemblance between her and Louise. Both were blondes, but in Patrick's embittered mind they shared the same label of worthlessness. Already, the blonde was guiding a delighted customer toward the private rooms. The only other dancer on the floor was an African-American woman. Patrick had no issue with African-American women, but her loud, grating laugh grated on his nerves. "I'll pass, sugar," Patrick told the Asian woman, slipping her a $5 bill. "Get yourself a drink, would you?" "Thanks, sugar," The girl smiled and turned her attention to the next patron. Hey, buddy, greeted the doorman as Patrick stepped outside. Just got here, huh? Just need one of those burgers, Patrick said. Burgers and fur burgers. Heard that, buddy, heard that, the man chuckled, fist-bumping Patrick. Driving along Highway 72, Patrick spotted Louise pulling up to the Oxbow Apartments. He pretended not to notice her, assuming she hadn't seen him either, but she had seen him. Parking in her spot, she bowed her head and sat quietly for several minutes. Raised by a permissive mother and an absent father, and let down by an inadequate public education system, Louise Renee Proust had little preparation for the real world. She excelled in tests and possessed an exceptional memory. In college, many of her grades were concessions by professors worn out from arguing with her. She held a master's degree in mechanical engineering, but Patrick Davis's rejection of her thesis had halted her dreams of pursuing a doctorate. With her tuition funds dried up, she now faced the reality of needing a job. Once again, Louise found herself battling primarily against her own reputation. The few places that showed interest in her background had contacted professors at the University of Louisiana at DeHart. None had anything positive to say about Louise Proust. She argued incessantly in nearly every class about why she deserved an A. Even when you gave her one just to appease her, she'd spend the next hour arguing about the next assignment, sighed Dean Melanson, when Clay Chopin from St. Elizabeth's Distillery inquired. Give her a C on her physics midterm? Next thing I know, I'm in Dean Sims' office facing a sex discrimination complaint, Professor Haxton snapped when King Sanity sought a recommendation. Louise continued to broaden her search radius, but the rejections kept accumulating. Oakleaf? Where's that? Queried Louise's mother. Texas, Louise replied, her cheerful mood fading momentarily. Bob always said there's no gravity in Texas, her mother smirked. Why don't people in Texas just float away? Texas sucks. Bob, Louise's absent father, had never been a part of her life, so his opinion of Texas held no weight for her. A quick search led her to secure a room in an apartment at Oxbow Apartments. Her roommate, Michelle Garcia, was a striking Latina. They split the rent of $750 along with utilities. Despite her attractiveness, Michelle was somewhat messy and had a tendency to argue even when Louise agreed with her. Is she your long-lost twin? Renee Proust joked when Louise called home to vent about Michelle. Michelle was also quite the libertine. It was rare for her to spend a night without company, and since their bedrooms were adjacent, Louise had no choice but to endure the sounds. Louise resolved that once their 6-month lease ended, she would not renew it with Michelle. Every dollar she saved was earmarked for buying a one-bedroom apartment in the same complex. With a sigh, Louise exited her car and wearily ascended the metal stairs to their apartment. She was grateful not to hear Michelle's music blaring. Hi, Michelle greeted Louise cheerfully, drying her long black hair with a towel. Going somewhere? Asked Louise, noting the absence of any cooking smells. Yeah, Eddie's taking me to Casa Ole, Michelle replied, heading towards her room. As she turned, the towel slipped, leaving her momentarily exposed. This is my life, Louise muttered to herself as Michelle squealed and hurriedly covered herself with another towel before retreating to her room. Louise was munching on a ham and cheese sandwich when a flushed Michelle emerged in a dress barely reaching mid-thigh, slipping into slippers. Good night, Louise murmured softly. Yeah, Michelle whispered back. Their project wasn't without its challenges. Managing a project spanning such distances with numerous crews was bound to encounter hiccups along the way. During the first week, Patrick rode alongside Pablo or Jim Tucker, Pablo's right-hand man. In the second week, he led his own team, actively engaging with them when challenges arose instead of delegating to others. Patrick was on site, observing issues firsthand, and directly communicated needs to Jason when necessary. Patrick, you make everyone else look talentless, Jason complained. Oh, is that how it goes? Patrick quipped. Come on, Patrick, Jason insisted when Patrick requested couplings and valves. That's what we're paying Miss Proust for. Patrick was taken aback, but promptly dialed Louise's extension. Miss Proust, he greeted in a professional tone. Mr. Davis, she replied equally professionally. He conveyed his requirements, their location, and ended the call. Patrick was surprised when Louise arrived at the construction site, accompanied by a worker. She observed without interfering as the crew swiftly connected heavy pipes amidst the noisy machinery. "Thank you, Miss Proust. I'm glad you came to see our challenges firsthand," Patrick acknowledged, and she visibly brightened at his praise. Approaching the trench, Louise peered into the ground to inspect their progress. She startled slightly when Patrick put his arm around her waist. "Before you cry harassment, you're wearing office shoes," Patrick explained calmly. "The ground here is loose, and I don't want you tripping and slowing us down." "That wouldn't hold us up," one of the crew joked. "We'd just bury it along with the pipe." "Yeah, she's from administration, not lacking in any way," another added, earning chuckles from the team. "Thanks, guys," Louise chuckled, then nodded approvingly at their work before stepping back. With a wave, she climbed into the truck, and the worker drove her back to the office. All the way, Louise felt a tingling sensation where Patrick's arm had rested around her waist. His scent lingered in her nostrils, the unmistakable odor of male sweat. From then on, whenever Patrick requested supplies, Louise ensured she personally delivered them to the site. Twice, when no one else was available, she took the initiative to drive pipes and elbow joints herself. Each visit, she sought progress updates. Each time, Patrick instinctively placed his arm around her waist, even though others offered to assist. "Thank you, Miss Proust," Patrick said gratefully as she turned to climb back into the semi's cab. "This is Louise," she smiled, lightly touching his bulging bicep. "Don't touch me, I'm covered in mud," he complained softly. "You?" she muttered mockingly, wiping him, throwing her hand defiantly on his t-shirt. "Hey, boss, do you think she likes you?" one of the men asked as Louise pulled away. "Been in the sun too long?" asked Patrick, and the crew laughed. Patrick's chest was firm, his stomach taut. He looked rugged and masculine in his t-shirt, tight jeans, and work boots. "Doesn't look like Patrick at all," Louise thought. Patrick Longstreet was quiet, thoughtful, introspective. He dressed well, smelled of lavender or jasmine cologne, his hair styled in a fashionable bob with bangs that hung over his soulful eyes. Patrick took care of his skin, kept his nails well-groomed, and always had fresh breath. He could discuss politics, applauded Democrats for their efforts against Trump, and enjoyed watching the Discovery Channel, TLC, and CNN. When he drank, Patrick preferred white wine. He didn't smoke and rarely used drugs, and when he did, it was usually just a bit of cocaine. The few times they made love, Louise found herself almost falling asleep. His lovemaking was slow, deliberate, and somewhat boring. In short, Patrick was the perfect man on paper. He was everything Louise thought she wanted in a partner. And yet, Louise couldn't stand him. Michelle joked that if Louise ever decided to get rid of Patrick, she would gladly take him off Louise's hands. Louise climbed into the truck's cab and sent Michelle a text message. "Did you tell him I'm TS?" Michelle wrote. Louise replied, "No." She then sent Patrick a text message informing him that they would not be seeing each other again. However, she let him know that Michelle would be happy to hear from him. In typical Patrick fashion, he accepted the breakup. He hoped they could still be friends. In fact, he would have liked to call Michelle, but he feared it would be awkward, the three of them in the same apartment at the same time. "Don't worry about it," Louise thought to herself as she headed to her office. Patrick was sitting in his office on Friday, buried in the mountains of paperwork that had accumulated over his tenure. He looked up when there was a knock on the door. 12:00. "Aren't you going to lunch?" she asked. "The line is usually a mile long by now," Patrick agreed. Then she pointed towards Benito's Pizza. "Benito's has a Friday night buffet," she offered. "Want to give it a try?" I'm on my Harley," he said. "Oh, well, I still want to ride," Louise said. He didn't smell like sweat when she leaned against him, but Patrick still had a distinct masculine odor. The ride to the pizzeria felt too short, and Louise even grumbled as she dismounted with shaky legs. She took off her helmet and shook out her long blonde hair. "That and railroad tracks," "Who needs a man?" she muttered, and Patrick laughed. They ate far more than they should have, but when the sign says, "All you can eat, $7.99, one feels compelled to eat their fill. Patrick roared out of the parking lot and headed south. Louise clung tightly to his back, puzzled by the wrong turn he had taken. They jostled over the railroad tracks together, the vibrations coursing through them. Patrick maneuvered around in the gas station parking lot and promptly raced back across the tracks. "Are you all right? Or should I do that a few more times?" he teased. Louise burst into laughter, clapping him on the shoulder. Again, he stopped long before she was ready to. In the morning, Patrick left with a brief greeting to Louise before he departed. A minute later, Michelle entered the kitchen. Patrick glanced at his cell phone and noticed a Texas number. It was local, so he casually answered the call. He dreaded the day he might receive a call from Missouri. He had already blocked Pam, Tiffany, Sean, and Debbie's numbers on his phone, but he knew there was no guarantee they wouldn't find another way to contact him. "Hello?" Patrick answered. "I need a ride," Louise demanded. Patrick swept Louise up in his arms, and she nestled against his back contentedly as they rumbled down the highway aimlessly. The sun descended towards the west, casting a warm glow as Patrick pulled up outside a barbecue restaurant. Louise stretched her legs with a grin as she removed her helmet, and when Patrick removed his, she leaned in and kissed him on the lips. "Come Monday morning, I'm reporting you for harassment to Coretta," Patrick quipped. "Uh-huh," Louise giggled. "Ever been here before?" "Nope, but I'm starving," Patrick replied, holding the restaurant door open for her. "And don't tell me you're one of those vegans," he teased. "I tried, but it's too much work," Louise confessed. While waiting to be seated, Louise draped her arm around Patrick's lean waist, noticing the curious glances from the hostess. Over ribs, Patrick learned that Louise started college at 17 and entered graduate school at 20. "I would have been working on my doctoral dissertation, but some hard-headed professor rejected it," Louise lamented. "There were some good points in there. Maybe just tweak it like I suggested. Who knows?" Patrick encouraged. Their banter continued until the waitress brought the check. Patrick silenced Louise's protests with a kiss. "Shh, just relax," he murmured, placing his credit card on the bill. "Stop trying to prove you're tougher than me, all right?" Louise chuckled, thinking of Michelle, then shrugged. "Fine. Next one's on me," she declared. "A steakhouse next time?" Patrick suggested. "Sure, why not? Or maybe a stone grill," Louise pondered. They sped out of the parking lot, the sun warming their backs as Patrick steered east on his Harley. 40 minutes later, they arrived at Patrick's East Lawn condominium, where he showed her around, the sparse living room, uncluttered kitchen, and minimalist bedrooms. "Clearly, this place needs a woman's touch," Louise remarked, unimpressed. "Sorry, pharmacy's fresh out of estrogen patches," Patrick quipped. They made love. In the morning, Louise hurriedly packed her bag, barely acknowledging Patrick and Michelle on the couch watching TV. She dashed down the stairs, ready for the day. "Hungry?" Patrick asked as she hopped onto the Harley. "Starving," she admitted eagerly. "Mrs. Davis? There's—" Pam heard over the intercom. Then she heard DeLuise asking someone his name again. "Is Stephen Stewart here to see you?" DeLuise finished relaying the message. "It would have taken you 5 seconds to ask his name before calling me," Pam snapped irritably. "Yes, ma'am. Send him back." DeLuise's annoying, whiny voice grated on Pam's nerves. Pam squinted at her computer screen, relying on the calendar app. She hated to admit it, but she needed her glasses. Sean had shown her how to zoom in, but it still wasn't sufficient. Stephen Stewart was here. She had nothing scheduled until 4:30 in the afternoon, just an inter-office planning meeting. That meant management would gather to complain about their respective departments. Pam planned to bring up DeLuise's disorganized and unprofessional behavior. "Yes, send him back," Pam snarled. "Yes, ma'am," DeLuise replied. Pam couldn't be certain, but she thought she heard DeLuise mutter something just before the unusually loud metallic sound of the phone ringing interrupted. A forceful knock followed shortly after. "Yes," Pam called out, trying hard not to betray her irritation as the door swung open. "Are you Pam Davis?" asked a large man, poking his head inside before the door had fully opened. Yes, and you are Mr. Stewart? Pam rose to her feet. Thank you. You've been served, Stephen Stewart said, handing Pam an envelope. The door closed, and Mr. Stephen Stewart disappeared. Pam stood holding a large manila envelope. Then she walked around her desk, sank heavily into her chair, and groaned softly. Please, let it not be, she pleaded, continuing to moan. The divorce petition was straightforward. Patrick hadn't asked for a division of marital property or spousal support, despite Pam now earning nearly $12,000 more than him. Pam glanced at the letterhead, her heart leaping into her throat. Patrick Aaron Davis had hired Upjohn May and associates from Colfax, Missouri, a firm she often saw advertised on TV. So he's here? He's back? Pam nearly shouted with relief. Hey, wash my hat, huh? Patrick said as they sat in the front pew at the church. Supposedly, he had gone to the restroom. But as the 5 bridesmaids and the groom walked from the back of the church to the altar, Patrick didn't return. Pam kept turning her head, scanning the back and side aisles, but he was nowhere to be seen. Then Tiffany, her baby girl smiling proudly, slowly made her way down the aisle. Michael James, grinning smugly, held his daughter's hand. Pam couldn't believe she had cheated on her dear, sweet, handsome husband with bloated, scruffy Michael James. As she looked around for Patrick, Pam wondered what had possessed her to go with Michael James to the Roadway Motor Hotel. If she was honest with herself, Pam enjoyed flirting. She relished reminding Michael of what he'd given up, what he'd thrown away. Tiffany shared the same sentiment. Pam saw Patrick as an inconvenience, an intruder. His presence certainly spoiled her enjoyment of bullying Michael James. "Oh, that little wuss let you come alone tonight?" teased Michael the next time they met. Tiffany wasn't present this time. They went to the bar and had a few drinks. The jukebox played some George Jones tunes, and Michael pulled her onto the small dance floor. He still knew how to dance. Pam didn't kick Michael to the curb because of his dancing skills. Now, at church, her son Sean seemed to notice Patrick's absence as well. Even Bobby appeared a little concerned as he glanced directly at her. Pam sat through the seemingly lengthy and dry ceremony alone. She held Patrick's hat on the pew beside her, keeping a seat reserved for him. Then the wedding procession began down the aisle. Pam hoped and thought that perhaps Patrick had come out of the restroom, saw the wedding had already started, and, not wanting to disrupt the proceedings, had gone to the reception hall next door. "Miss Pam, where's Patrick?" asked Bobby. Pam couldn't provide an answer. She had no response for the disapproving looks from Debbie and Sean. Many guests knew she and Patrick were married, and that she and Michael were divorced, prompting questioning glances. But everyone was too polite to inquire about her husband's absence. "Mom, the photographer wants to take a picture of you and Dad dancing," Tiffany mentioned almost an hour later. "The photographer can go jump in the lake. She's not getting it," Pam snapped back. Finally, the seemingly endless festivities concluded. Debbie and Nicholas drove Pam home. Michael attempted to coax Patrick into the car, but Pam nearly caught his hand on the door as she slammed it shut. Sean determinedly steered his father toward their own car. Bobby and Tiffany also drove to Pam's house to retrieve their suitcases. The newlyweds faced an hour-and-a-half drive to the St. Louis airport, needing to arrive at least 2 hours early for their overseas flight. Pam burst into the house, leaving Debbie to turn off the alarm. She rushed upstairs and entered the bedroom. Her heart sank as she saw an open closet with an empty rod. The top 2 drawers of the dresser were partially open and devoid of contents. "Mommy!" Tiffany shouted at the top of her lungs. "What?" Pam screamed, tears blurring her vision. "That jerk! Where are our suitcases?" Tiffany yelled in frustration. Nicholas returned home to fetch his and Debbie's suitcases, a round trip taking an hour from Pam's house to his and back to Pam's again. Then Debbie, Bobby, and Tiffany hurriedly packed everything into their suitcases. An unfortunate accident with 3 fatalities on Highway 43 had caught Bobby and Tiffany off guard, resulting in them crawling along for nearly 3 hours. They arrived at the long-term parking lot 28 minutes after their flight had departed. As a result, Mr. Hunt and Mrs. James Hunt spent their first night as husband and wife at the Express Motor Lodge instead of in a hotel room in Barbados. The airline was understanding and waived the fees for rescheduling their flight. However, the hotel in Barbados charged them for the night, despite not using the room. 4 days after leaving St. Louis, Bobby Hunt returned to Missouri and instructed his father's attorney to file for an annulment. If the annulment wasn't possible, he would settle for a quick divorce. "Remember courtship? It's the best part of life," Patrick Davis told Bobby. Despite the rocky start to their honeymoon, Bobby hoped to still enjoy a tropical paradise, lounging in the sun with his bride on the beach and sharing passionate nights together. However, Tiffany's incessant complaints and nearly psychotic outbursts toward him, the staff, and other guests made the honeymoon unbearable. "You're turning our honeymoon into a nightmare. You know that," Bobby finally snapped. "Fuck you," Tiffany growled bitterly. "No, fuck you, Tiffany, I'm out," Bobby declared, grabbing the small suitcase allotted for his belongings and stuffing his clothes into it. Out of spite, determined to assert herself and show Bobby that she wouldn't back down, Tiffany stayed the full 2 weeks. She even turned off her cell phone. If Bobby wanted to apologize, he could leave a message on her voicemail. She wouldn't be there to take his call. Pam was at work, killing time, when Tiffany called her. "Mom, I'm at the airport," Tiffany said urgently. "I don't see Bobby anywhere." "No kidding, Tiffany. Really? You don't see him?" Pam shot back, her sarcasm dripping thickly. "No. Why? What's going on?" Tiffany asked, confused. $27,000 just went down the drain. That's what's going on, Tiffany," Pam said bitterly. "Huh?" Tiffany replied, bewildered. Tiffany waited until she landed at Chicago O'Hare, her transfer point before heading to St. Louis, to turn on her cell phone. There were no messages from Bobby. There was one message from her mother, a 3-second clip simply saying, "What did you do?" Upon landing at St. Louis Lambert Airport, Tiffany checked her phone again. Still no messages, no missed calls, no texts. She retrieved her 3 suitcases from the carousel, scanning the arrivals area for Bobby. He was nowhere to be seen. Sean had left work early to come pick up his sister. Stoically, he loaded the suitcases into the trunk of his car and settled into the driver's seat. Tiffany sat silently for a few minutes, seething with anger. Sean sighed when the toll booth attendant cheerfully asked for $2, turning to his sister. "Got $2?" he asked curtly. "What's with the attitude?" Tiffany snapped, shoving $2 into his hand. "Oh no, Tiffany, you're welcome," Sean retorted sharply. "I get the pleasure of leaving work 3 hours early, hours I won't get paid for, and wasting 5 gallons of gas to pick you up and bring you home. And then you can't even bother to pay a few lousy bucks for the ride? How about I swing by Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and treat you to a filet mignon? I'm sure you're hungry, right?" "Look, I was on my honeymoon, okay?" Tiffany shouted back defensively. He drove in tense silence for 20 minutes. Tiffany ignored him completely. "Congratulations, by the way," Sean said bitterly. "You're getting a divorce, you know that?" Tiffany stared at him, her mouth open in shock. What he had just said didn't make the slightest bit of sense. "I'm what? No, you can't be serious," Tiffany whispered, her voice barely audible. "From the moment he arrived in Colfax," Sean confirmed solemnly. Tiffany shrieked in horror. She fumbled to grab her cell phone from her purse and dialed a number, pressing 5A. Her rage boiled over when she heard the cheery message that the number had been changed or was no longer in service. As soon as Bobby's mother, Miss Kitty, recognized Tiffany's voice, her usual warmth turned to fury. "Don't ever call me again," she roared before hanging up abruptly. Desperate, Tiffany called Bobby's workplace. The receptionist answered in her usual cheerful tone, unaware of the storm brewing on the other end. "Bobby Hunt, please," Tiffany requested urgently. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but Mr. Hunt is on his honeymoon," the receptionist replied cheerfully. "In Barbados, can you believe it?" No, that's not right. Please, Whitney, Courtney, please let me talk to him," Tiffany pleaded, her voice cracking. "It's Courtney," the receptionist corrected hesitantly. "What do you mean he's not on his honeymoon? I attended his wedding." Tiffany didn't respond. She simply disconnected the call. The drive back to Pam's house was filled with the oppressive quiet, broken only by Sean's country music playing softly on the stereo. When they arrived, Sean pulled up in front of their mother's house. We have an apartment, Tiffany murmured weakly. No, Tiffany, no, Sean muttered grimly. What part of divorce don't you understand? It's over. The 3 suitcases remained where Sean had left them, in the living room, on the couch. Tiffany trudged upstairs to her bedroom, collapsed on her bed, and stared blankly at the ceiling. An hour later, Pam found her daughter in the same position, her eyes fixed on nothingness. "What did you do?" Pam asked quietly, concern etched on her face. "Nothing," Tiffany protested weakly. "We're on our honeymoon. He'll cool off and come back." Debbie's husband, Nicholas, was an attorney specializing in estate planning, but he had also reviewed Bobby's divorce petition. "By the way, I brought one of your suitcases. Where are the others?" Nicholas inquired. "Over there," Tiffany mumbled, pointing vaguely. "Really?" Nicholas snapped as he tried to lift one of the suitcases. "Do you expect me to do your laundry, too?" But when Tiffany had the audacity to smirk at Pam's mention of Patrick leaving her, Pam did what she should have done when Patrick first met that spoiled brat. Nicholas turned away, barely concealing a satisfied smile, while Tiffany nursed her reddened cheek. "Counseling?" Bobby sighed as his attorney, Leon Holtmeyer, conveyed Tiffany's request. "It could strengthen your case in court," Leon remarked casually. "Who knows? You loved her enough to marry her once. Counseling might help." "One condition," Bobby interjected firmly. "Actually, 2 conditions. First, there needs to be a reasonable limit. Not endless sessions, not dragging this out indefinitely." 8 sessions. If it's beneficial, you can request more," Leon agreed. "And the second condition?" "She should undergo counseling for herself as well," Bobby insisted. Tiffany nearly retorted with a "screw you," but both Nicholas and Pam suggested it couldn't hurt. Nicholas selected Tiffany Benhurst as their counselor, a woman known for her strong feminist views and outspoken stance against men. "Honestly, I can't fathom why he doesn't want to be married to me anymore," Tiffany scoffed as she and Bobby sat in Dr. Benhurst's office. "Barbados was breathtaking. We should have been enjoying ourselves, and he decides he's leaving." "Wow. Just wow," Bobby responded, genuinely taken aback. "Is that really how you see it?" "Perhaps you can enlighten us, Mr. Hunt?" Dr. Benhurst interjected sharply. "How do you perceive these events?" "You say Tiffany, Michelle Church, and her daughter Brianna didn't die to ruin our honeymoon," Bobby explained. "Kevin Lightfoot's accident on Highway 43 caused delays. 3 lives were lost. Yet, Tiffany seems to overlook how that affected us." "Who?" both Tiffany's queried, confused. "That accident caused us to be late," Bobby clarified. 3 people lost their lives because of it, but Tiffany won't acknowledge how that impacted our plans." He turned to Tiffany, his expression pleading for understanding. "Remember? I looked it up on my phone when we got to our room. Remember what you said?" "So? That's what you said. So what? A 5-year-old girl is dead, and all you can say is, 'So what?'" Even Dr. Benhurst glanced at Tiffany, her expression tinged with disapproval. Tiffany decided to feign remorse. "I know, God, I can't believe how inconsiderate I've been," she purred. Bobby let her finish. Dr. Benhurst smiled encouragingly at Tiffany. "Uh-huh," Bobby said. "What were their names?" "Who? What names?" asked Tiffany. "The 3 men who died. What were their names?" Bobby clarified. Tiffany stared at him blankly, then turned to Dr. Benhurst, hoping for assistance. "And Dr. Benhurst, why did she hate Patrick Davis so much, huh?" Bobby continued, rising to his feet. "I never understood it. The man loved her mom, did everything for her, but Tiffany hated him like poison." "We still have 15 minutes," Dr. Benhurst interjected. "I need to get back to work," Bobby said tersely. "It'll take me at least 20 minutes to get there from here." He glanced at Tiffany as if about to say something, then abruptly headed for the door. "You were about to say something," Dr. Benhurst noted. "I was going to ask her why she picked a doctor across town, But then I realized it doesn't matter. None of it matters, Bobby said. Ma'am? Mrs. Hunt? The receptionist called as Tiffany emerged from the counselor's office 5 minutes later. What? Tiffany snapped. Ma'am, the session fee is $140, please, said the receptionist. What? Tiffany exclaimed indignantly, slapping her Visa card down. If the receptionist was taken aback by her abrupt, aggressive demeanor, she hid it well. And your individual session is Thursday the 9th at 9, the receptionist added pleasantly. Easy to remember, 9 on 9. Whitney, the receptionist in Bobby's office, put Tiffany through to Bobby. Yes, he answered. You made me pay for it? Tiffany exclaimed. You wanted counseling. You pay for it, Bobby replied. Anything else? I'm working on an order. Need it by 4. Pam felt no sympathy for her daughter. She had her own issues. Day after day, she sent emails to Patrick, pleading for him to return home. His Facebook status still indicated he was married to Pam Davis. His last message, posted on Tiffany's wedding day morning, read, Ding dong, the witch is dead. Pam wasn't sure if Patrick was referring to her or Tiffany. On the day of the wedding, her calls went straight to voicemail. By Sunday afternoon, his voicemail was full. By Monday morning, his number was disconnected, so Tiffany's problems were her own. She got herself into this mess. She could get herself out. 3 months after the wedding, Pam came home to find Tiffany had demolished 1 box of Girl Scout Thin Mints and started on a second. Pam started to say something, then shrugged. She didn't care. She just didn't care. There was a half-empty container of homemade Bluebell vanilla bean ice cream in the trash. I suppose I should be grateful you managed to get it in the trash, Pam commented. What's that supposed to mean? Snapped Tiffany bitterly. Well, usually you leave the empty container where you ate it for someone else to clean up, Pam retorted. As the date of the engineering convention approached, Jack Warner suggested they try to find Patrick Davis there. Despite his absence from social media, locating Patrick Aaron Davis wasn't difficult. Pam almost smirked. Patrick had turned up in DeGard, Louisiana. In DeGard, a detective agency had tracked down Michael James. Jack informed Pam that he and Patrick's boss, Joe Gaudette, had both attempted to persuade Patrick to attend the convention, but Patrick had adamantly refused. You're welcome to come with us anyway, Jack suggested. Who knows? Maybe he'll change his mind at the last minute. He won't change his mind, Pam replied, shaking her head. Pam, when was the last time you ate anything? Jack asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. Pam looked haggard, her skin hanging loosely over her skeletal frame, and her hair unkempt. What? I had lunch 20 minutes ago? Pam snapped back. Debbie also expressed concern about Pam's appearance. Mom, you're losing weight faster than Tiffany is gaining weight, she remarked. Leave Tiffany alone, Sean interjected. Thanks, you're always on my side, Tiffany said, glancing at Nicholas. Can't help it. Jenny Craig gave up on her, Sean joked, which elicited laughter from both men before they shifted the conversation to the St. Louis Rams' upcoming trade to Los Angeles. Pam resolved not to hesitate any longer. She would swallow her pride and grovel if necessary. She needed to beg Patrick to come back home. The receptionist at St. Elizabeth's Hospital had such a thick Cajun accent that Pam requested to be transferred to someone in America. Ma'am, I'm right here in Louisiana, yeah, the receptionist retorted angrily. And where you at from, huh? Colfax, Missouri, Pam replied, holding back her frustration. May I speak to Patrick, please? He ain't here no more, the receptionist confirmed. Then may I speak to Mr. Gaudette? Pam asked. Oh, you mean Mr. Gaudette? The receptionist chuckled, pronouncing the name in the Cajun style as Goday. She placed Pam on hold. Joe Goday confirmed what the receptionist had told Pam. Patrick Davis had resigned and was no longer employed at the facility. From what I hear, he's gone to Oak Grove, somewhere in Texas, Joe added. It took a mild heart attack to jolt Pam out of her mental fog. One night, she woke unable to catch her breath. Initially dismissing it as a panic attack, minutes passed, and her breathing worsened, genuinely frightening her. Luckily, Tiffany was still awake downstairs in the living room, watching a movie and finishing a box of Crunch and Munch. She assisted her mother to the car, genuinely surprised by how weak Pam had become. Driving them to North Lake Hospital, Tiffany's resentment towards Patrick Davis resurfaced. 30 minutes after Tiffany's call, Sean arrived at the hospital. Debbie and Nicholas followed 40 minutes later, both looking somewhat groggy. "Should I call Jack?" Sean asked Tiffany. "Jack?" Tiffany queried. "Her boss? Her friend? Come on, Tiffany, get with it," Sean snapped, calling Jack Warner himself. Exercise, diet, medication, standard prescriptions for a mild heart attack. Jack Warner stood at the foot of Pam's hospital bed, looking intensely at her. "Pull yourself together," he urged sharply. "Get it together, or you're out of a job." With that, he turned and strode purposefully out of the hospital room. "What a character," Tiffany remarked. "Mom, he's right," Debbie agreed. "You really need to take charge." Now sitting in her office, clutching her papers, Pam felt as though she might have another heart attack. Nicholas picked up the phone promptly. He knew Pam wouldn't call his office unless it was urgent. "Well, at least the waiting is over," he finally said. He called Maylon Sue, Patrick's lawyer, and spoke with the young attorney. He agreed to represent Mrs. Davis in the lawsuit and provided Maylon Sue with all his contact details. "Well, Pam," Nicholas began, to put it simply. "Any chance we could try counseling?" Pam interjected. "No, I'm afraid not," Nicholas admitted, bracing himself, hoping this news wouldn't precipitate another heart attack. After a long pause, he asked if she was still there. "Yes, I'm here," Pam replied, her voice devoid of energy. "Pam, I'm sorry, but Maylon Sue said she's representing him in absentia. Besides, it's been over 3 years. Even if he lived down the street, no judge would agree to a meeting after so much time has passed," Nicholas explained gently. "Just one meeting, please." "Just one meeting with him," Pam pleaded desperately. Returning home, Pam retrieved the red dress that Patrick had always admired. But when she tried it on, she found it garish. It hung loosely on her slumped shoulders, and her figure seemed deflated. She called Claudette, her longtime hairdresser, and made an appointment. Then she went to the mall, hoping to find a dress that would accentuate her charms. "God, when did I get so old?" Pam groaned inwardly as dress after dress seemed to age her rather than enhance her beauty. "At least my legs are still nice," Pam muttered to herself, trying on yet another dress. "Yes," she overheard one salesman whisper to another. On the day of the meeting with Maylon Sue of Upjohn, May and Associates, Pam and Nicholas were escorted into a tastefully furnished conference room. There were only 8 chairs around a heavy wooden table. The room felt intimate. "Coffee? Water?" asked their polite assistant. "You know what? Coffee with a splash of cream?" Nicholas requested. "Ma'am," the assistant smiled. "Decaf? And a bit extra?" Pam asked. "Certainly," the assistant agreed. She returned shortly with 2 steaming mugs. "I have one of those single-cup machines. I love it," she shared, placing the mugs on napkins. "A K-cup?" "Yes, just got it recently," Nicholas acknowledged. "Thank you," Pam said politely. "No problem," the assistant replied cheerfully. "Well, I'm certainly relieved that doing your job isn't a problem," Pam retorted sharply, as the door closed behind the assistant. She turned to Nicholas. "I really can't stand people who say no problem instead of you're welcome," she remarked tersely. "Anyway, have you thought about what you're going to say?" Nicholas asked. Pam wrestled with nerves, unsure if it was anxiety or perhaps even the onset of a heart attack. She had rehearsed this moment countless times over the past few years. Finally, she shook her head and forced herself to smile. "Why did I bring you along?" she mused aloud. Before Nicholas could respond, an attractive Asian-American woman entered the room. Her long hair was intricately braided, cascading almost to the floor. She wore a smart suit that retained a feminine touch, and she greeted everyone with a warm smile before taking a seat across from them. Pam's heart skipped a beat when Patrick followed the lawyer into the room. Once a handsome young man, Patrick now exuded a mature charm with his tanned complexion and brown eyes. He had opted for casual attire, khaki pants paired with an off-white golf shirt, accessorized with a matching black belt and loafers. "My attorney informed me I didn't need to be here," Patrick stated bluntly as he settled into his chair. His expression remained impassive as he glanced at Pam. "But why did we get married, Pam? How long have we been married?" Patrick inquired, his tone neutral. This had often been a point of contention. Pam struggled to recall dates and numbers. When asked about their children's ages or the duration of their marriage, she habitually deferred to Patrick. Pam stared at Patrick, while Nicholas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. 11 years, Patrick answered before Nicholas could interject. "We've been married for 11 years, since last month's 23rd, and I insisted to Melon Sue that this discussion should be private." "You look good," Pam finally managed to say. "Thank you. You look as beautiful as ever," Patrick replied politely. Pam appeared every bit of her 53 years. Crow's feet lined the corners of her eyes, deepening like talons. Wrinkles marked her forehead, and heavy bags sagged under her once bright blue eyes. Loose skin hung along her jawline, evidence of the passing years. Her arms appeared frail, with sagging skin that hinted at weight loss and inactivity. Her hair, styled as it always had been, seemed out of place on her now less vibrant face. "So, how's it going?" Pam stammered, trying to break the awkward silence. "It's been fine," Patrick replied tersely, offering no further explanation. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Pam's face lit up. "Oh, you're a grandfather," she exclaimed. "Hey, congratulations," Patrick said warmly, turning to Nicholas. "Oh no, not me," Nicholas corrected quickly. "Tiffany," Patrick guessed. "Yes, Tiffany," Pam confirmed. "God help that poor child," Patrick muttered bitterly. "But I thought you and Bobby were divorced?" Patrick asked after a moment. "We are," Nicholas confirmed. "She's raising the baby on her own." "Patrick, is there any chance—" Pam trailed off, her voice trembling. Patrick exchanged a glance with his lawyer, who retrieved a folder from her briefcase and handed it to him. "Pam, I loved you. I loved you with all my heart," Patrick said quietly, tapping his finger on the corner of a file folder resting on the polished desk. "I loved you too," Pam agreed softly. "Really? Really?" Patrick's bitterness crept back into his voice. "I did, and I still do," Pam said, her voice breaking. "Then why, Pam?" Patrick asked, opening the folder and pulling out a photograph of Pam and Michael locked in an intimate embrace. Pam's tears blurred her vision as Patrick flipped through more incriminating photos. One showed them entering a hotel room together. Another captured them in a passionate embrace at a rehearsal dinner. "He was mine. We were married. Pam sobbed, unable to finish her sentence. "And I could have overlooked all of that. It would have been difficult, but because I loved you so much." Patrick's voice thickened with emotion. "But this, such blatant disrespect, in front of everyone?" Several moments passed in heavy silence, broken only by Pam's labored breathing and occasional sniffling. Nicholas finally cleared his throat. "Where did you get these?" he asked, nodding toward the photos. "I hired the private investigator that Pam hired to find Michael," Patrick replied, his eyes still fixed on Pam. Pam didn't look up. She simply shook her head. Another long silence hung in the air. "Michael didn't just show up like Pam claimed, so I had him surveilled. It took less than a week," Patrick explained, gathering up the photos. We'd like to ask for counseling," Nicholas said weakly, breaking the heavy silence that followed. "There wasn't really any chance, was there?" Pam groaned, her voice thick with resignation. "I'm sorry, Pam," Patrick said quietly, his expression strained. Pam's despair erupted into heartbreaking sobs. Patrick's face tightened with pain as he watched the woman he once loved crumble before him. Melon Sue moved towards the table to retrieve a box of tissues, but Patrick gently nudged Nicholas's hand with it. "It was excruciating," Melon Sue remarked an hour later, after the emotional storm had somewhat subsided. He and Patrick sat in Melon Sue's office, waiting for the courier to arrive and collect the signed and notarized documents. Patrick's gaze drifted to an oriental engraving on Melon Sue's wall, its serene beauty offering a stark contrast to the turmoil in the room. "When all of this started," Patrick began, his voice carrying a trace of weariness, "I called Ben Upjohn, talked to him." Patrick sighed deeply, Melon Sue patiently waiting for him to continue. "He wanted to go all out, scorch the earth, burn everyone in his path," Patrick recounted. "Sounds like Ben," Melon Sue agreed knowingly. I just wanted to escape the pain," Patrick admitted, his gaze returning to the oriental print. "I never understood how bankrupting Pam, taking every last penny from her, would ever numb that pain." "I just wanted to get away," Patrick said quietly, his voice heavy with regret, "to distance myself from the pain as much as possible." He stared at the oriental print again, its intricate details offering a silent refuge amidst the emotional turmoil. "I just wanted to get away," Patrick said wearily, his voice tinged with resignation, "just to separate myself from the pain as far away as possible." "So why did you come?" Melon Sue asked, her gaze also drifting to the serene oriental print on the wall. "I loved her. I still do," Patrick replied quietly. Melon Sue nodded understandingly as the courier entered the office, collecting the signed documents before leaving again. "I guess I felt I owed it to her," Patrick added, his tone reflecting a mix of duty and lingering affection. He rose from his seat, retrieving his motorcycle helmet from the nearby chair and pulling on his jean jacket while checking his keys in his pocket. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Patrick said, a hint of weariness in his voice, "there are a lot of highways between here and Texas." Louise entered the condominium with her heavily pregnant belly, setting down the day's mail on the counter with a sigh of relief as she slipped out of her shoes. "Does Mommy need her feet rubbed?" Patrick asked, greeting her warmly. "You're pregnant. You're beautiful. And my God, you're glowing," Patrick added with affection. An envelope from Upjohn, May & Associates caught his attention. Patrick opened it, finding another envelope inside. In the upper left corner was an address sticker belonging to Tiffany James, bearing Pam's street address sent to the law firm. Louise noticed Patrick's expression darken as he read the contents. Sensing his distress, she stepped around the counter and gently touched his muscled bicep, leaning against him for support. "But how can you even think of such things? God, I'm huge. I'm like a whale in here," Louise protested with a happy tone. "You're pregnant, you're beautiful, and my God, you're stunning," Patrick corrected her warmly. An envelope from Upjohn, May & Associates caught his attention. Patrick opened it carefully, finding yet another envelope inside. In the upper left corner was a familiar address sticker bearing Pam's street address, sent by Tiffany James to the law firm. Louise saw Patrick's expression darken and immediately stepped around the counter. She gingerly touched his muscled bicep, leaning against him for support. "What is it?" she whispered softly. "From my former stepdaughter," Patrick almost growled, his frustration evident. He glanced over the bank statement, utility bill, and a flyer from a toy store. "Who doesn't know we're expecting?" Patrick mused, eyeing the advertisements that confirmed their upcoming parenthood. "Oh, look at the Scooby-Doo playset," Louise exclaimed happily. Later that evening, Patrick finally opened the envelope sent by Tiffany. He smirked at the formal "Dear Patrick" greeting. "Oh, I'm sure you're just full of apologies," Patrick muttered as he began reading her words. He didn't make it past the first paragraph before the tone shifted from apologies to excuses for Tiffany's actions. Frustrated, he crumpled the single sheet of paper, glanced at the picture of the curly-haired girl, and tossed the letter, envelope, and photo into the wastebasket. Bobby insisted on a paternity test. It was humiliating, sitting in the doctor's office, staring at each other. Tiffany had promised to inform him of the results, but Bobby's response was a harsh, cruel laugh. "Like I'm going to believe you," he scoffed. Dr. Nina Sue, an attractive Asian-American woman, entered the office with her professional smile and took her seat at her desk. Then she shattered Tiffany's hopes, crushing them into a million pieces. "Goodbye," Bobby chuckled, patting Tiffany's head like she was a dog. "No, Are you sure? Tiffany whispered. I mean, Bobby's the only one I've ever... Even after the divorce, Bobby always came running whenever Tiffany called, claiming to be a little lonely. They would meet for dinner or drinks, which often ended up at his apartment. Bobby always insisted on condoms, but condoms aren't foolproof. Then Tiffany recalled one incident, just one. She was in the plus-size section of a department store, searching for pants. Her size 16 jeans were becoming too difficult to button. She had to lie down on the bed to fasten them. I bet black really suits you, one of the men suggested. Tiffany was about to tell him to back off and mind his own business. But when she turned around, there stood a living statue of David in front of her, a modern Michelangelo's work. The man was simply stunning. Curly dark hair, deep brown eyes, and the shadow of a 5 o'clock beard. Yeah? But what kind of top would go with this? Tiffany asked, placing her chubby hand on his muscular bicep. He helped her pick out a few pairs of pants and tops, and then carried everything into the fitting room. Why is my granddaughter crying? Pam soothed as she entered the baby's room. Oh, why is my beautiful Gabrielle crying? As self-centered as Tiffany was, seeing her mother still saddened her. Pam looked emaciated, with loose skin hanging off her limbs and her once beautiful face. After her second heart attack and early retirement, all Pam seemed to do was sit around and watch TV. Gabrielle appeared to be the only thing Pam lived for, but even that seemed to be slipping away. Tommy McElroy found himself lying awake once again, held captive by the relentless symphony of his wife's snoring. Caitlin's nocturnal sounds followed a predictable pattern, advancing through various phases depending on what she had imbibed that evening. Tonight, it was beer, which meant phase 3, a deep, rumbling snore on each intake of breath. Tommy knew this would soon escalate to phase 4, where the snore deepened into a moaning hiss with each exhale. If she were really into the beer, phase 5 would arrive, a harsh, snorting gasp on each intake that often stirred her awake momentarily. To delay the inevitable, Caitlin sometimes sipped water from the glass on her bedside table, temporarily staving off phase 1, a gentle breathing followed by a harumph, and the subsequent phase 2, a lighter snore. But when she indulged in hard liquor, especially whiskey, phase 1 skipped straight to phase 4 or 5, extending the cacophony until Tommy had to gently nudge her awake. Unfortunately for Tommy, nudging Caitlin awake came with its own risks. If he disrupted her drunken slumber too much, she would snap awake in a fury, adamantly denying any knowledge of snoring and laying blame squarely on his shoulders. The reason for tonight's beer consumption was a family gathering at their home. Caitlin's mother, Patricia Monroe, along with her twin brothers Chad and Jeffrey, and sister Hillary, had descended upon their household for what Caitlin optimistically called a nice little family get-together. A nice little family get-together usually consisted of long moments of awkward silence, punctuated by his mother-in-law reminding them that they were nearly 30 years old. The CRC. Why did they still live in an apartment? Why didn't Tommy have a real job? Did they ever plan on having children? Meanwhile, Chad and Jeffrey would glare at him with undisguised hostility. Hillary sympathized with Tommy, but, joining her sister in drinking, could only muster a feeble, "Come on, y'all, leave him alone," every so often. Caitlin, who had decided they would wait on having children, would just smirk when her mother brought up their lack of offspring. The once beautiful and voluptuous Caitlin Monroe was now a bloated remnant of her former self. She would also smirk when her mother made snide remarks about Tommy's job at Clark's Drive-In, ignoring the fact that his job paid their rent, groceries, and her endless law school tuition, books, and other incidentals. Though he rarely had money left over, he was covering their bills. Phase 5 of Caitlin's snoring lasted nearly 3 minutes until she jerked awake. To his relief, she took a gulp of water before flopping back down into her mountain of pillows. He gently pressed his fist into her back as she attempted to roll over, keeping her facing away from him. Maybe now he could fall asleep. For a few years, Caitlin seemed content with their relationship as it was. Tommy worked as an assistant manager at Delphi's Diner, while she occasionally attended school, often taking 1 or 2 semesters off to recharge. She was happy living at home with her beloved father, Judge Harold Monroe, her mother Patricia, her sister, and 2 brothers. Tommy had been professing his love for Caitlin since they first started dating in high school. Upon their graduation in 2005, he had proposed, and while Caitlin didn't outright decline, she suggested they wait. Tommy knew then he should have walked away and often wished he had. She seemed especially thrilled by the danger of potentially being caught by her father, which added an illicit thrill to their encounters. Every time Tommy brought up marriage, Caitlin would ask what the hurry was. Then, in the summer riot of 2012, Delphi's Diner, one of the many DeGard businesses, was destroyed in the flames. The adjacent DeGard dance studio, where Tommy's friend and former classmate Kizzy Clark worked, also fell victim to the Angels' 270's destructive rampage. Tommy and Kizzy stood together, staring at the smoldering ruins of their workplaces. Kizzy, who loved dancing, teaching, and her students, clung to him, sobbing uncontrollably. "Hey, boy," said Stan Delchon, the third-generation owner of Delphi's Diner and grandson of the original Mr. Delphi. "This is it. My wife's been after me for 10 years to sell. Stan Jr. and Barbara, they want nothing to do with it. Can you believe that? This place paid for their fancy-schmancy schools, and they don't even care. But what are you going to do, huh? Goddamn kids, huh? Here, boy, you were a good kid. Always liked you. You take care now." Tommy had been professing his love for Caitlin since they first started dating in high school. Upon their graduation in 2005, he had proposed, and while Caitlin didn't outright decline, she suggested they wait. Tommy knew then he should have walked away and often wished he had. She seemed especially thrilled by the danger of potentially being caught by her father, which added an illicit thrill to their encounters. Every time Tommy brought up marriage, Caitlin would ask what the hurry was. "What are wieners?" Then, in the summer riot of 2012, Delphi's Diner, one of the many DeGard businesses, was destroyed in the flames. The adjacent DeGard dance studio, where Tommy's friend and former classmate Kizzy Clark worked, also fell victim to the Angels' 270's destructive rampage. Tommy and Kizzy stood together, staring at the smoldering ruins of their workplaces. Kizzy, who loved dancing, teaching, and her students, clung to him, sobbing uncontrollably. "Hey, boy," said Stan Delchon, the third-generation owner of Delphi's Diner and grandson of the original Mr. Delphi. "This is it. My wife's been after me for 10 years to sell. Stan Jr. and Barbara, they want nothing to do with it. Can you believe that? This place paid for their fancy-schmancy schools, and they don't even care. But what are you going to do, huh? Goddamn kids, huh? You see, here, boy, you were a good kid. Always liked you. You take care now." "Looks like shit, honey. Why don't you just wear a tablecloth and a pair of jumper cables?" Tommy said after Caitlin modeled the 6th dress. "God damn, why do I even bother? You're such a fucking asshole," she shrilled, stomping away. A harsh knock at the door ended the fashion parade, thankfully. Unfortunately, the dinner still needed another 20 minutes to cook, since Tommy had been tidying up the apartment while preparing the meal. 20 minutes. 20 long minutes of uncomfortable silence or complaints. 20 long minutes of Chad, Jeffrey, Hillary, and Caitlin helping themselves to his beer while Patricia complained about the low-quality wine he served. Low quality or not, it didn't stop her from emptying nearly the entire liter bottle. Caitlin's Phase 3 snoring started, but Tommy finally managed to fall asleep. The next morning was blustery and cold, a typical November day. Tommy prepared oatmeal for breakfast, making sure to have plenty of sugar on hand. Caitlin would heap so much sugar into her bowl that it turned nearly white, all the while complaining that she hated oatmeal. He also had a steaming mug of coffee and a tall glass of orange juice ready. "Morning," she groggily mumbled, staggering into the kitchen. He looked at her in the harsh morning light. Both were 27 years old, but Caitlin looked almost 40, with blotchy, puffy skin, wrinkles on her arm. on her forehead and lifeless blonde hair in dire need of washing. Her jowls hung down, and she had 2 double chins. But she was his wife, and he loved her. He had fallen for her beauty long ago, and despite how much she had changed, he found it hard to turn that love off. Even if she scarcely resembled the girl he had fallen in love with, she was still Caitlin. Tommy had no illusions about his own appearance. He still had the head of dark curls he'd had in high school, and his muscular arms and chest were maintained by hard work. His belly was beginning to soften slightly, so he resolved to do 10 extra push-ups each morning to regain the tight abdomen he had once been proud of. His thighs and calves remained muscular from the hours he spent on his feet, ensuring the diner ran smoothly. However, there were now lines on his face, and a few strands of gray shot through his dark curls. His mother always commented on how tired he looked whenever he visited her. "Fucking hate oatmeal," Caitlin grumbled, heaping 3 tablespoons of sugar into her bowl. "Uh-huh. It's cold outside. I thought a good hot breakfast would start your day right," Tommy said, taking his own bowl into the living room to eat on the couch. To his left was the judge's leather recliner, an overstuffed, ugly blue monstrosity that Caitlin had insisted on having. Tommy thought it was a fitting reminder of Judge Harold Monroe, a large, overstuffed, ugly inconvenience. Oh, I need $20. It's Parker's birthday, and we're all going to Casa Ole's for lunch," Caitlin interrupted his thoughts. Oh, tough shit. The electric bill was almost $300 this month because someone kept forgetting to turn off the heater when she left," Tommy snapped. "Guess they'll just have to go to his birthday party without you." "Fine fucking asshole," Caitlin snarled bitterly. Tommy made sure his wallet was securely in his pocket until she got dressed and slammed out of the apartment, already 20 minutes late for class. He wasn't worried about her. She would either swing by her mother's, stop by Hillary's workplace, or borrow the money from a co-worker at the law office of Johnson, Johnson, and Lambert. Since he didn't have to go to work until 4 that evening, Tommy stretched out in bed and was asleep within seconds of laying down. Chapter 2. "Order up!" Tommy yelled, even though Melinda Fontenot was only 5 feet away, preparing the sodas for the order. "Got it!" she yelled back. Outside, the cold, blustery November day had turned into a cold, blustery, and rainy November night. The high canopy of the drive-in kept the waitresses mostly dry, but every now and then a gust of wind would blow the rain under the canopy, spraying the poor girls. "God damn, it's cold out there," Debbie Dublachon, one of the waitresses, complained bitterly as she skated in. "And can you believe this? Some idiot out there wants a large hot fudge sundae. A sundae! I mean, it's what, 20 degrees out there?" "If it were 20 degrees, it'd be snowing," Tommy corrected, quickly making the sundae while she waited. "Might as well be," Debbie said, grabbing the sundae off the counter. Kizzy Clark skated in, called out her order, and dashed to the restroom. Nancy, the short-order cook, repeated the order and dropped 3 hamburger patties onto the grill. Tommy looked out at the row of customers' cars and grimaced as he saw Jack Vogel's orange Charger pull up. A moment later, laden down with trays, Melinda came barreling into the diner. "Hey, Tommy," she called out. "1 cheeseburger, hold the meat, 1 cheeseburger with mayonnaise, lettuce, and tomato, and chili cheese fries," Tommy said before she could order. "Yep," she beamed up at him. Tommy sighed. Because Jack had been a classmate of his and Kizzy's, Melinda assumed that dating Jack meant that she, Tommy, and Kizzy were friends. Tommy didn't really have a problem with the bubbly girl. He found her quite pretty, and she seemed to have a good head on her shoulders. But Jack Vogel had been an asshole when they attended St. Thomas Aquinas together, and Tommy hadn't liked the brash, arrogant man back then. Now that Jack wore a police uniform, he was even more brash and arrogant. Tommy wondered if Jack even knew Melinda's regular order, cheeseburgers without the meat. He poured the melted cheese onto the French fries, putting chili on only 1/2 of the plate. He knew Melinda would eat from the meatless side. Tommy doubted Caitlin knew that he liked to mix ketchup and Tabasco for his fries. After 9 years together, whenever she offered to bring home dinner, she still had to ask what he wanted. "Order up!" he yelled while Melinda fixed Jack's cherry cola and her own Diet Cola. Tommy bet Jack didn't know his girlfriend drank Diet Cola because she believed herself to be fat. Melinda wasn't fat. She had slightly large breasts, a cute little bubble butt, a flat belly, and muscular legs from hours of skating. "Order up," Nancy announced. Kizzy grabbed it. "How come Melinda's order was ready before mine?" Kizzy teased Nancy. "Because the sooner I feed Jack, the sooner he's gone." Tommy smiled. Kizzy shot him a wide smile back. Tommy admired her long brown hair, her firm buttocks, and her extremely muscular legs as she skated away. Sensing his gaze, she turned at the door and shot him another wide smile. He shook his head. It was a shame that Kizzy, as pretty as she was, happened to be as flat as a board in front. "She's a looker, huh?" Nancy asked, shaking out a cigarette. "That stuff's going to stunt your growth," Tommy teased. The 4'8" tall Nancy smirked, slapped him on his rear, and waddled out the side door, letting in a tremendous blast of cold air. Tommy used the time between orders to clean the work area, monitor the level of hot oil in the fry bins, and stack the plates, dishes, and trays. Kizzy walked. Her father had been reluctant to hire Tommy based on her recommendation, but he now had to admit that Tommy McElroy was a godsend. Debbie Dublachon, the baby sister of a former classmate, spent her downtime busily texting with her boyfriend, Donald DJ Pellichet, Jr. Debbie let out a shriek as Nancy opened the side door, letting in a blast of cold air. Tommy and Kizzy laughed, and the 18-year-old girl glared at them. 3 times that night, Tommy had to run out into the cold rain to throw away garbage. After the drive-in closed at 10 p.m., he quickly gathered all the trash and made a final run to the dumpster. He came back thoroughly soaked after a customer, obviously not seeing him, splashed him as they drove past. "Go, go, I got this," Tommy ordered the 3 waitresses and Nancy. He made sure all the doors were locked, the grill was shut off, and the fry vats were turned off before going to count that night's receipts. Because John Clark was an unbelievable cheapskate, the heater shut off automatically at 10 p.m., and it was now quite chilly in the small office as Tommy made out the deposit slip and prepared the bank bag. Finally, he shrugged on his coat, put his left hand on his .32 snub nose, and ran for his car. He kept his eyes on the road around him, ensuring he wasn't being followed, but still drove past the First Union Bank before doubling back and racing up to the night deposit drop slot. This time, he pulled his pistol out, had the safety off, and then dropped the bag into the slot. Not even Caitlin knew Tommy owned a gun and had a concealed weapons permit. His mother did know about the gun and was quite vocal about her fears. However, she agreed with him that if anyone was going to rob him, she would rather Tommy be the one to shoot the robber than the robber shoot Tommy. Then he drove home to their second-floor apartment. Tommy looked up to the third-floor apartment as 2 people stepped out onto the landing. From where he sat, it appeared to be a young woman and a man, but bundled as they were against the cold, it was hard to tell. Then he saw his upstairs neighbor open the door and hand the smaller bundled figure a purse. Tommy's eyes widened as the petite redhead stepped outside, completely nude, seemingly unconcerned about being visible from the parking lot and the street. He cursed the darkness that prevented him from discerning if her hair color was natural. Caitlin had claimed their neighbor was not a natural redhead. Clearly, feeling the cold, which Tommy couldn't remember the name of, the neighbor quickly kissed both figures before retreating into her apartment and closing the door. Tommy sat in his darkened car until the 2 figures climbed into a late-model BMW. He then stepped out into the cold rain and shivered. Inside their apartment, Caitlin lay sprawled on the couch, 2 textbooks on the floor beside an empty bottle of Evan Williams. Tommy pursed his lips. That bottle hadn't been open for more than 2 weeks, and he had bought it to replace the one Chad and Jeffrey had finished. Tommy knew Caitlin would be in Phase 4 and 5 for much of the evening. As he stood there, shivering in his wet clothes, she was already deep into an intense, snorting, grunting, gasping version of Phase 5. He went into the bathroom, opened the hamper, and nearly stormed back into the living room. That morning, he had asked her to wash his work clothes, and she had promised. He even showed her where the roll of quarters was, and she sealed the promise with a kiss. The hamper was just as full as it had been that morning. Weary from the day's trials, Tommy showered off the day's stench and pulled on a t-shirt and flannel shorts. For a fleeting moment, he debated waking Caitlin. She must have stirred between his entry into the apartment and his exit from the bathroom. She was back at Phase 4, snoring. Fuck her. Promises to do the clothes. Oh, I promise. Then doesn't? Fuck her. She can sleep on the damn couch, he muttered to himself and flopped into bed. Why didn't you wake me? Caitlin shrilled at him the next morning as he fixed their eggs over medium, toast and grits. I did. Woke you up when I got home, Tommy lied. Told me you just had a few more pages to do, then woke you up again when I got out of the shower, and you said you'd be right in. She looked confused. But why didn't you wash my clothes like you said you would? Tommy asked, slapping her plate in front of her. Oh, I forgot, Caitlin responded nonchalantly. Don't worry, I'll do them today. I'm not going into the office today, okay? Caitlin, the reason I begged you to do them yesterday is because I have no work clothes for today, Tommy snapped. Never mind. Never fucking mind. I'll do the damn clothes myself. You just do whatever you want. Don't worry about it. God, I said I'm sorry, all right? Fuck! I forgot, she yelled at him. Chapter 3. Lord, as Tommy felt awful, certain he was running a fever. He woke up with a pounding headache, and even the 3 Tylenol he had taken did little to ease the pain. He ate his breakfast listlessly while Caitlin shoveled her food into her mouth. Oh, I had to borrow $20 from Jason. He's this IT geek there, Caitlin informed him. Borrow 20? Why did you have to borrow $20? Tommy asked, forcing down a mouthful of food with a swallow of orange juice. Parker's birthday? At Casa Ole? Caitlin huffed. Remember? I asked for $20 and you went off on some tirade about heating bills and... Immediately after finishing his breakfast, Tommy gathered up his clothes, the laundry detergent, and the roll of quarters, and slammed out of the apartment. In the laundry room, the petite redhead from upstairs smiled at Tommy as he entered. Using 2 of them leaves you with 3, she said in her squeaky voice. How you doing? Tommy mumbled a response, wishing again he could remember her name. He recalled she mentioned she was a dancer at the Dead End Bar, and had frequent visitors, both male and female, tramping up and down her stairs. Then he sat down as she transferred the clothes from one machine to a dryer. Tommy snapped back to awareness when she nudged him. Hey, your clothes were done, so I put them in the 4th dryer. It's the fastest one, she smiled. I'll be neighborly and do that, but I'm not paying for you. You can pay for your own drying. Thanks, he mumbled, and her smile faded. You all right? You don't look so good, she asked in a concerned voice. Yeah, I'll be fine, he said, getting to his unsteady feet. Are you sure? Is your wife at home? She inquired as he wobbled over to the 4th dryer. Beats me. Probably not. He shrugged, feeding some quarters into the machine. Oh, you're burning up, she exclaimed, touching his forehead. You need to get into bed. Good idea, he agreed and flopped back into the chair. Want me to check if Caitlin's home? She offered. No, I'll be all right, he mumbled, wishing he could recall the woman's name and hoping she would stop talking. Her voice grated on his nerves. She made him promise he'd take some aspirin and rest, then left the laundry area. Damn, Angela cares more. Angela? Her name is Angela Brott, or Brant, or something like that, Tommy muttered. His clothes were dry and only slightly warm when he woke up again. Caitlin's car was gone, as was Angela's, as Tommy staggered up to their apartment. He stared at the dirty dishes in the sink, the pan still sitting on the stove, and the now warm jug of orange juice on the table. It was already 11:30, but Tommy wasn't hungry, so he took 3 more Tylenol and left everything just as Caitlin had left it, except for putting the jug of orange juice back into the refrigerator. He flopped back into the unmade bed and fell asleep. Tommy was grateful he had set the alarm. It woke him at 3:30. Despite Caitlin's assertion that she wouldn't go to Johnson, and Lambert that afternoon after class, it was now 3:30, and she wasn't home. He pulled on his clean work clothes, debated whether to eat something, decided on 3 more Tylenol and a glass of orange juice, and then headed to work. At work, Tommy's head quickly became congested, and he was constantly blowing his nose to clear it. After carrying the trash out to the dumpster, he dashed back into the building and decided to use the bathroom. "I mean, Jack knows I want to be a virgin on my wedding night," Tommy heard Melinda saying to someone. "Oh, come on. In high school, Jack was one of the biggest—" Kizzy's voice protested. Tommy wasn't trying to eavesdrop. They were standing right by the door, and the sink was next to the door. "I mean, I give him—" Both girls shrieked when he opened the door. "Hey, y'all. Teresa's out there all by herself," Tommy barked, his tone harsher than intended, and both girls skated back outside. Harvey, the new short-order cook, smirked as a red-faced Melinda hurried in and shouted an order, avoiding Tommy's gaze. "What did you catch her doing?" Harvey asked, then frowned. "Dude, you look like shit," he added, noticing Tommy's condition. "And coming from me, that's saying something." "Oh my God, you're on fire!" Kizzy gasped, feeling Tommy's forehead. "Oh, Tommy, go home. Go on. I'll call Daddy." Tommy didn't argue. He could barely stand any longer. He locked the receipts they'd made so far into the safe, then staggered out to his car and left. Arriving at the apartment building, he frowned deeply. Hillary's Lexus was parked in his spot. In the visitors' spaces, there was Chad or Jeffrey's SUV and a police cruiser. Tommy wasn't sure who the police cruiser was visiting, so he simply parked behind the SUV. He cursed as he stomped up the stairs. If Hillary and Chad, or Chad and Jeffrey, were there, that meant they would be drinking, and they would be loud. He could beg them, plead with them, reason with them. But they wouldn't be quiet. In fact, they would likely double the noise level just because he asked for quiet. They weren't in the living room or the kitchen/dining area, but Tommy could see the aftermath of their visit. There was a bottle of Jim Beam almost bone dry. It hadn't even been opened that morning. There was also a nearly empty bottle of vodka. Several beer cans were scattered around the kitchen and living room. Tommy almost smirked. There had only been 4 cans of beer in the refrigerator, so someone had bought the other 14 cans now strewn about. Tommy frowned deeply. If Hillary and Jeffrey weren't in the kitchen/dining area or the living room, and the bathroom door was ajar and dark inside, there was only one other place they could be. Quickly grabbing his cell phone, Tommy activated the video recording function and cautiously pushed the door of the bedroom open. The sight that greeted him on the queen-sized bed was Chad engaging in intimate activities with Hillary. Hillary froze in horror at Tommy's unexpected appearance, then let out a blood-curdling scream. "Hi, honey. I'm home," Tommy called out loudly. Jeffrey reacted with anger, screaming profanities and slapping his sister. Caitlin, who had been lying on the bed as well, moaned in dismay as she turned to see her husband in the doorway. "He's taking pictures," Hillary suddenly realized, panic in her voice. Tommy smirked and calmly turned away. "He's got pictures," Caitlin screamed hysterically. "You hear me? He's got pictures of us." Hillary broke into loud wails, distraught over the exposure of their affair. Tommy walked out of the apartment, down the stairs, and cursed himself for not grabbing their car keys when he noticed the clothes scattered on the floor just as he was leaving the bedroom. "Oh, well, too late now," he muttered, shaking his head, and got into his car. Chapter 4. Gladys McElroy picked up the phone on the first ring, a sign she had been sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her herbal tea. She detested the taste, but her chiropractor, Dr. Bestoff, had praised its health benefits so highly that Gladys now drank it religiously. "Mom, please open the garage," Tommy requested. "Well, sure," Gladys replied cheerfully, her slippers tapping against the linoleum floor as she moved. "There," she said, setting down the phone. "Now, what do you need?" "So I need to come over and get some rest, okay?" Tommy explained as he pulled into the garage. "Of course, honey," his mother agreed. She hung up the phone and met him at the kitchen door leading into the garage. "Hey," Tommy greeted her, hitting the button to lower the garage door. "Oh, baby," Gladys exclaimed, feeling his forehead. "You must have a fever of at least 100 degrees. Here, sit down. Let's see." she said, guiding him to a chair and opening the medicine cabinet. Tommy smiled to himself. At 27, nearly 28, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighing 182 pounds, mostly muscle, he knew his mother would still treat him like her little boy, fetching children's aspirin for him. Sure enough, she found the bottle of Bayer's orange-flavored aspirin, and he dutifully took 2 tablets. Now, would you like some soup? I have that kind you just add boiling water to, and it turns into soup. Or maybe, Gladys began, heading to the pantry. Sure, Mom, that sounds great. Is Dad's computer still in the den? Tommy asked, changing the subject smoothly. Tommy knew better than to interrupt his mother as she busied herself in the kitchen, listing off each item in her pantry until he settled on the chicken noodle soup. A safe choice for his unsettled stomach. Yeah, I don't know why it's still here, just collecting dust. I even tried donating it to that school, but they didn't want it, Gladys remarked, fetching a pot to prepare his soup. Tommy wandered into his father's den, a space that still felt haunted by memories. His father had passed away suddenly, 3 years ago, from a massive heart attack. As Tommy set up the laptop, he couldn't shake the melancholy that washed over him in this room. His father had prided himself on being a tech enthusiast, always having the latest gadgets. Fortunately, the equipment in the den was still up to date enough for Tommy's needs. He plugged in his cell phone, located the FireWire, and began the process of downloading the video. With a mix of dread and fascination, Tommy watched the footage unfold on the screen. 5 naked bodies cavorted on the bed, 1 pudgy, another bloated, and 3 trim and athletic. He quickly muted the sound just before Hillary's scream pierced through, saving the video to his personal email, his work account, and a 3rd email server Caitlin was unaware of. He also stored a copy on the laptop's hard drive before shutting everything down. Just then, Tommy's cell phone rang, displaying Caitlin's number. He silenced the call and then powered off his phone. Here you go, sweetheart, his mother said warmly, placing the steaming bowl of soup on the table. The house phone rang and Gladys hurried over to answer it. That's Caitlin. I'm not here, okay? Tommy called out. Hello, Gladys answered. Caitlin? No, she's not. Oh, this is Caitlin. Well, you can hardly blame me. I mean, when's the last time I saw you? I mean, really, you work right down the street at that fancy schmancy lawyer's office. But do I ever see you? No, I do not. What? They won't give you 30 minutes to come over here for lunch? I mean, I got those microwavable pizza rolls. We could have that. Those only take just a couple of minutes to heat up. Or I got that soup. You know, the kind you heat with water. Oh, wait. No, I don't have that anymore. I just finished making a pot of that. What? Tommy? No, I haven't seen him either. If you see him, tell him his mother's over here, all alone in this house. I swear I could be dead and he'd never know it. What? You tried his work? All he ever does is work. Never has any time for, oh, okay, bye. Thanks, Mom, Tommy chuckled as his mother shot him a mischievous grin. Realizing his hunger, Tommy quickly polished off the soup. You still hungry? I can fix you some. Gladys started. Mom, right now, all I want to do is crawl into bed and crash, Tommy interjected. Oh, okay. What time do you want me to wake you up? You've got work in the morning, right? I better call your boss, Gladys said, taking the bowl to the sink, scrubbing it clean, and placing it in the dishwasher. Tommy's room remained untouched since he left. He moved the 2 high school yearbooks off the bed, lay down, and fell asleep within minutes. Oh, poor baby, his mother gasped as Tommy knelt in front of the toilet, emptying his stomach. Thanks, Mom, he managed weakly as she sponged his clammy forehead. When there was nothing left to purge, Tommy staggered back across the hall and collapsed onto his bed. This time, exhaustion overtook him swiftly, plunging him into a deep, dreamless sleep. Meanwhile, at the apartment, Caitlin rummaged through the small cabinet, finding the dark rum. She frowned. Tommy knew she despised dark rum. Perhaps he bought it just to annoy her. Okay, he's not answering his phone. Go straight to voicemail, a worried Hillary announced. If that motherfucker breathes a word of this to Melinda, I'll kill him, Jack snapped, now dressed in his police uniform. Fuck, if he shows that shit to Mom, she'll kill us, Chad complained. Kizzy said he left about an hour ago. He was sick, so she sent him home, Hillary added, dropping her cell phone into her purse. I can't fucking believe this, Caitlin moaned, taking a hefty drink from her tumbler. You knew he was sick? Hillary asked her sister. Nope. Didn't say a word to me, Caitlin replied, then finished off her glass. Vogel, you back from dinner yet? Deputy Orville Jackson's voice crackled over Jack's shoulder-mounted radio. Yeah, I'm here, Jack replied tersely. Orville dispatched Jack to a domestic disturbance at the Lambert condominium community. Jack smirked as Orville relayed the address over the radio. Let me guess, the rug munchers are at it again, Jack snickered into his shoulder-mounted radio. The unit belonged to a lesbian couple, both struggling with alcoholism. Their fights were infamous for their intensity, often escalating into physical altercations involving chairs, barbells, or even knives. Officer Vogel, that's enough, Deputy Jackson's voice cut in sharply. Back in the apartment, despair hung heavy among the 4 siblings. Oh, God, oh, please, oh, God, Caitlin whimpered, rocking back and forth. Still voicemail, Hillary sighed, dropping her phone into her purse once more. If Mom finds out about this, we're done for, Caitlin muttered bleakly. Chapter 5. After 3 days of being fed, pampered, and loved by his mother, Tommy was feeling almost completely recovered. He sat at the kitchen table, enjoying a grilled cheese and tomato sandwich, along with a bowl of homemade split pea soup, when a harsh knock echoed through the house. Now, who in the world? Gladys muttered to herself, adjusting the sash on her housecoat. Afternoon, ma'am, Jack's voice barked when Gladys opened the door. What, Jack? Gladys snapped, unimpressed by his uniform or badge. Seen Tommy? Jack barked back, still trying to assert authority. No, and I don't care for your attitude, Gladys retorted sharply. Want me to call your mother? Won't be necessary, ma'am, Jack replied, attempting to peer past Gladys into the dim interior of the house. Looking for Tommy, his wife's worried about him. Uh-huh. If she's that worried, she could come here herself instead of sending a dumbass monkey in a police uniform. He's probably at work. Ever think of that? Gladys said pointedly. Now, if there's nothing else. And with that, she slammed the door shut in Jack's face. Caitlin's looking for you, Gladys reported matter-of-factly. So, that's the one she was having an affair with? Mom! Tommy exclaimed, shocked by her blunt question. What? Call me late at night, need a place to stay, don't want to talk to your wife. It adds up to one thing, Gladys remarked pointedly. Now you want some pie? I made that banana cream pie you like so much. Sure, Mom. Let me finish up this soup, Tommy chuckled, enjoying the comfort of his mother's cooking. Hello? Gladys answered the telephone. Well, hello, Caitlin. Just saw that friend of yours, Jack Vogel. Said you're looking for Tommy. You try his work? Well, when's the last time you saw him? He hasn't been home in 3 days? Why? No, he doesn't come home for 3 days. There's got to be a reason. Now what is it? Oh, I'm sure you do know. Now what is it? Gladys hung up and retrieved the banana cream pie. Big piece, or? She asked, already cutting a substantial portion for him. At the apartment, Caitlin resisted the urge to throw her cell phone, knowing her mother wouldn't pay for another one, and glared at her 2 brothers. He's there. I just know it. Little pussy always runs home to his mommy when it gets too hard for him, she sneered. Want us to go over there? Chad asked, flexing his non-existent muscles. And do what? Caitlin sneered, searching the refrigerator once more for any alcohol that might be hiding in the cool interior. Get her to tell us where Tommy is, Jeffrey suggested. Whatever. She'd kick your ass before you even got halfway in her house, Hillary sneered. Now, let's see. Hillary punched in a number and waited. Clark's, John Clark, Kizzy's father and owner of Clark's Drive-In, answered. Yes, hi. Is Thomas McElroy there, please? Hillary asked pleasantly. No, he just called, said he'll be back tonight, John replied, reviewing next week's schedule. About what time, please? Hillary inquired. About 4 till closing, John confirmed. Now, if there's nothing else? No, thank you, Hillary said and ended the call. He'll be at Clark's tonight, she announced to the 3 others. Hey, Jack, Caitlin said into her cell phone. Found him. He'll be back at work tonight. Yeah, Hillary just called. Oh, might want to take Chad and Jeffrey with you. We need to get that phone. How do you know he hasn't made copies of it? Hillary asked. Computer's right there, Caitlin said, pointing. And I got the cable in the bedroom. Can't do anything with it without the cable. Oh, okay. Aw, shit, Hillary exclaimed, checking her watch. Aw, shit. I'm going to be late. You drive me to work. Come on. Here, you take her, Chad said, handing his car keys to Jeffrey. Why me? You do it, Jeffrey protested, pushing the keys back to Chad. After we get that phone, I know we're going to have to lay low for a while, Chad said. Yeah, Caitlin moaned, but we've got to get that damn phone. We'll get it, don't worry, Chad reassured her, sounding confident. Chapter 6. Jack cursed under his breath as his giggly girlfriend waved enthusiastically at him while he drove past. He hit the siren briefly, causing Melinda to giggle as she skidded to a halt next to a customer's car. Yeah, that's my boyfriend, Melinda announced proudly to the uninterested customer. Jack circled around the back of the drive-in and grinned when he spotted Tommy McElroy's car. Yeah, the jerk's here, Jack muttered into his cell phone when Jeffrey answered. He gets off around 10:30. Melinda says he handles the night deposit. Good, so we'll meet you there, Jeffrey confirmed. He's there, Jeffrey relayed to Chad, around 10:30. Listen, don't hurt him, just get his phone, Hillary instructed. Fuck that. The bastard deserves a beating, Jeffrey spat angrily. Caitlin finished her drink and let out a small giggle as she burped. Right, Caitlin, Hillary pressed. They don't need to hurt him, do they? Whatever, Caitlin replied indifferently, deciding she might as well take a shower if Tommy was due home soon. In her mind, if Tommy didn't have proof of her affair, he'd have no choice but to come home. Chad, Jeffrey, and Caitlin didn't notice that Hillary seemed more concerned about Tommy's well-being than his own wife did. At the drive-in, Tommy smiled warmly at Kizzy when he noticed her staring at him with affectionate eyes once again. She had been a year younger than him and Caitlin at St. Thomas Aquinas, and from the moment she arrived at the school, she made no secret of her crush on him. However, Tommy had only ever had eyes for Caitlin Monroe. He had followed Caitlin like a lovesick puppy, while Kizzy had followed him in the same manner. Good to see you back, Kizzy finally managed to say, her cheeks flushed. Glad to be back, Tommy replied, calling out, Order up. Thanks, Teresa Smith said, taking the tray from Tommy and expertly balancing 4 cheeseburgers and 4 large chili cheese fries. No drinks? Tommy questioned, inspecting the tray. They said they had their own, Teresa replied. Uh-huh. Better let me take that, Tommy said, donning his coat. Which car? The white Cadillac. Why? What's going on? Teresa inquired. That much food and no drinks? Tommy said, stepping around the counter and heading towards the car. Not saying they would, but sometimes people take the tray and drive off. What? Teresa watched curiously as Tommy approached the car. Hey, guys. Tommy greeted them with a friendly smile. That'll be $28.40, please. Where's the girl? The driver asked, glancing around. Tray was too heavy with all that food, Tommy said with an easy smile. Didn't want her falling and busting her butt. $28.40, please. The fact that the 4 men had to scrounge through their pockets to gather the money confirmed Tommy's suspicion. They were college boys out for a night of drinking and smoking a few joints, now hit with the munchies. Spotting the drive-in, they decided to grab a bite and leave the waitress to pick up the tab. John Clark didn't charge the waitress for drive-offs, but too many could jeopardize her job. Thanks, guys. Y'all come back now, here? Tommy said cheerfully as he accepted the $29. Change? The driver asked. Really? Tommy raised an eyebrow. Not even going to give her a big 60-cent tip? If she wants a tip, she should have carried the tray herself, the driver sneered. I'll send her out with the change, Tommy said. Tommy handed Teresa 60 pennies and instructed her to take it out to the group. They were going to stiff me, weren't they? Teresa asked him. Big 10-4, Tommy confirmed. Wow, what assholes, Teresa muttered bitterly as she skated out the door. Live and learn, Kizzy said with a sympathetic smile. 2 smokehouse, no pickles on 1, large regular fries, Melinda shouted as she skidded to a stop next to the soda fountain. Got it, Harvey replied, his eyes subtly following Melinda's movements as she maintained her balance. She's a cutie, isn't she? Tommy remarked to Harvey. "Affirmative, sir." Harvey nodded. "Order up," Harvey announced a minute later. "Thanks," Melinda said, grabbing the tray and darting out into the bitter cold. "2 fish, no tartar, cheese fries add jalapenos," Teresa called out as she whizzed in, coming to a sudden stop near the drink machine. "How'd those boys like their pennies?" Tommy asked, curious. "Dropped them on the ground," Teresa growled. "Losers." "Oh, well, their loss," Tommy shrugged. At 10:05, Tommy decided to send everyone home, despite Harvey offering to stay and help. "Brother, I got this." Tommy smiled reassuringly, locking the door behind the Marine. A block away, Jack parked his cruiser, reached onto the floorboard of his car, and grabbed a regular sweatshirt. He also donned a ski mask, then slipped out of the car and approached Chad and Jeffrey, sitting in Chad's SUV. "Come on," he barked impatiently. "Fuck, why we gotta walk? Fucking cold out here," Jeffrey complained, pulling on his ski mask. "He sees your SUV, thinks he's coming out, dumbass," Jack snapped back. "God damn, do you think I want to walk? Fucking right, it's cold out here, but boo-hoo." Inside the building, Tommy smiled as the heat shut off promptly at 10 minutes after 10. Kizzy had apparently complained to her dad about how cold it got right after closing, and it seemed her complaint had finally worked. Tommy efficiently checked the receipts, completed the deposit slip, and prepared to exit the building. As he stepped outside, 2 masked figures seized his arms, while a third approached. Tommy smiled, recognizing Jeffrey's comically absurd reindeer ski mask. "All we want is the—" Jeffrey started, attempting to disguise his voice. "Uh-huh," Tommy interrupted, swiftly firing a shot into Jeffrey's shoulder, causing him to collapse to the ground. Tommy had no intention of killing Jeffrey, though he wouldn't shed any tears if Jeffrey did die. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot!" Chad screamed, dropping to the ground and shielding his head with his arms. Jack reached for his service revolver. Tommy grimaced but knew he had no choice. Jack was an asshole, always had been, and likely always would be, never taking responsibility for his actions. Even if Tommy survived being shot at close range and Jack went to prison, Jack would return seeking vengeance. If Tommy didn't survive and Jack did go to prison, he would seek revenge on Tommy's mother upon his release. "Hate to do this, but—" Tommy muttered, then decisively put a bullet through Jack's right eye. Tommy retrieved his cell phone, the very phone the assailants had been after, and promptly dialed 911. Chapter 7. Tommy McElroy might have found some dark humor in the situation if it weren't for the grim reality of taking a man's life, especially one of Patricia Monroe's sons, despite the circumstances. Patricia Monroe was livid that Tommy had shot her son during what she viewed as a robbery attempt, completely overlooking the fact that her sons were the aggressors. Tommy wanted to laugh, to release some tension, but the weight of killing a man weighed heavily on him. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the gunshot echo and saw the shock on Jack's face as he fell. He knew logically he had no choice. Sheriff Dick Davis confirmed Jack had a gun in hand when he died. Yet, the guilt persisted. And Tommy had always cheered for the heroes in movies, believing in their justice. But those films never showed the aftermath, the sleepless nights, and the burden of taking a life. Chad and Jeffrey remained silent about why they wore ski masks and why they waited outside Clark's drive-in. Caitlin, Hillary, and the others feigned ignorance, unwilling or unable to shed light on the truth. Donald Pellichet, DJ's father and a lawyer, had volunteered to represent the McElroy family pro bono after Vermarni Vogel, Jack's mother, filed a lawsuit against Tommy regarding her son's death. Patricia Monroe had also initiated legal proceedings until Parker Johnson from Johnson & Johnson and Lambert pointed out that Jeffrey's involvement in the crime significantly weakened their case for damages. "The Vogels don't stand a chance either. Your actions were clearly in self-defense, Tommy, but I understand the burden of facing a frivolous lawsuit," Donald said sympathetically. "How much do you charge for a divorce?" Tommy asked abruptly. "Oh, thank God," Gladys exclaimed. "Mom, could you wait outside? Why don't you ask Ethel to get you a coffee?" Tommy suggested gently. What do you mean, one of them coffees? Gladys asked, bewildered. They have those machines that make them 1 cup at a time, with different strengths. You can pick exactly what you want, Tommy explained with a smile, assisting Gladys out of her chair. You hush. My coffee is just fine. Your father loved it, Gladys protested, as she closed the office door behind her. Tommy chuckled, hearing his mother regaling Ethel, the young receptionist, with stories about his father. All right, Mr. Pellichet, this is why those 3 were waiting outside for me, Tommy said, placing his cell phone on the man's desk. Jack, the guy I killed, and Caitlin's 2 brothers are involved in this. Donald's face tightened slightly, the only flicker of emotion crossing his dark features as he watched the damning footage. And the 2 women they're with are my wife and her sister, Chad and Jeffrey's sisters. So, I want a divorce based on infidelity. I also want, Tommy explained as the short video clip concluded. Louisiana's a no-fault state. You don't need to prove infidelity, Donald interjected calmly. I've been taking crap from that family for most of my life, Tommy said firmly. Countless years of not being good enough, rich enough, or smart enough. I know Louisiana's laws, but I want a little payback, all right? Got it. I'll need you to provide a list of all marital assets, Donald Pellichet said, pulling out a standardized form from his desk. But how much is this going to... Tommy started to ask. She's the one who's been unfaithful. Let her cover the costs. Donald smiled wryly, then fixed Tommy with a serious look. She's the only one, right? You don't have someone else on the side? He asked pointedly. No, of course not, Tommy affirmed. Boy, better not be lying to me. If I get your wife up there and start digging and find out you got 2 or 3 little girls you're playing house with, Donald demanded. Sir, I promise, I'm not playing house, playing doctor, or playing you show me yours, I'll show you mine, with anyone. Tommy smiled reassuringly. You make any copies of this? Donald asked, nodding towards Tommy's phone. Here, brought a copy for you, just in case, Tommy said, pulling a disc out of his shirt pocket. You know how much one of those machines costs? Gladys asked, bustling into the office and handing Tommy a cup of coffee. I told that girl we'd have to be insane to pay that much. Here, got you one. She said it's the strongest they make. Hope you like it. Probably paint your liver black, I swear. Thanks, Mom, Tommy smiled gratefully. I mean, seriously, who in their right mind pays that much for a coffee machine? Gladys continued, taking a seat. But do you like the coffee? Donald asked, amused by Gladys's spirited commentary. Well, yeah, it's good. She got me this one, what's it called, smooth something, and it's not too strong, not too weak. I added French vanilla cream to it. Gladys nodded. No, I didn't put anything in yours, don't worry, but it's really good. Then, ma'am, it's worth every penny we paid for it, Donald smiled warmly. I like him, Gladys admitted as they drove away from the office of Richards, Pellichet, and Jones. At their office, Parker and Brandon Johnson listened to the highly implausible story concocted by Hillary and Caitlin Monroe to explain why their brothers and Officer Jack Vogel had ambushed Tommy McElroy. After a moment, Parker raised his hand. Okay, let's start again, but this time tell us the truth, he urged. Caitlin and Hillary exchanged glances before Caitlin launched into the same fabricated tale. Parker and Brandon exchanged skeptical looks. Meanwhile, Chad Monroe sat in the Bender Police Department lockup, while his brother idled in the DeGard Police Department lockup. Jeffrey had been taken to St. Elizabeth's Trauma Center for treatment of his injured shoulder. Despite his injury, Jeffrey found himself transferred to DeGard's lockup after a day in the hospital. Dude, why can't I stay at the hospital? Jeffrey whined to Sheriff Bob Chastain. I'm injured. Not life-threatening, the sheriff replied with a shrug. Back at Clark's drive-in, Tommy caught up with John Clark about what he had missed during his nearly week-long absence due to illness and legal matters. Yeah, that blonde, the one who used to date that cop you... Well, you know, John Clark began, filling Tommy in on the latest news. Melinda Fontenot? Tommy asked. Yeah, her. Anyway, she quit, said she wasn't going to work here if we weren't going to fire you. John shrugged. Fire? You're not going to... Tommy started to ask. Son, those 3 punks were fixing to rob me. I mean you, John said, his face hardening. Would have killed all 3 of those punk-ass scumbags if it had been me. Hey, Kizzy interjected, skating into her father's office and grabbing Tommy in a fierce hug. "Oh my God! When I heard you'd been robbed, I swear to God my heart just stopped. You can ask." "Hey, honey, we're talking," John interrupted. "Uh-huh, right. Whatever," Kizzy said, giving Tommy another squeeze before skating back out again. Son, you might have noticed my Kizzy. Well, she, John hesitated, his face turning redder. She kind of sort of has a little bit of a crush on me?" Tommy asked, rising to his feet and reaching for an apron. "Yeah, I mean, hell, I've told her you're married, and, John said, also standing and pulling his stained apron off. "Welcome back, stranger," Nancy said, dropping a few more patties onto the grill, pre-cooking them for the dinner rush. "Stranger, huh?" Tommy smiled, his practiced eye sweeping the parking lot, the canopy, and the interior all at once. "When it comes to strange—" "None stranger than you," Nancy cackled, beating him to the punch. Monica, another blonde waitress, regarded Tommy with almost open-mouthed awe. Tommy glanced at her. She had been working at the drive-in for nearly a year, but he had never noticed any interest from her before. Finally, Monica blurted out, "What happened? I mean, all we heard was these 3 guys tried to rob you, and you—" "All I know is I step outside, 2 guys grab me, and a 3rd guy starts reaching for me. I shot him, then the 2nd guy pulls a gun on me, and I knew it was either him or me," Tommy recounted, echoing the story he had repeated many times. "Then, turns out I know all of them. Can you believe that?" "Were you scared?" Monica whispered, still in awe. "It happened so damn fast. No, I really didn't have time to be scared," Tommy admitted. "Then the minute I sit down, it hits me. I just killed a man." "Huh," Monica whispered, her blue eyes wide. "Customers out there, not in here," John barked gruffly, and Monica gave a little yelp before skating out into the bitter cold. "Tommy McElroy, you're my hero," Nancy whispered, imitating Monica's wide-eyed delivery. "Shut up," Tommy smirked, diving into the myriad menial tasks that fast food restaurant duty demanded. "Son, next time give them the money," John advised quietly. "Nothing in that bag's worth dying for. Just give it to them." "Uh-huh," Tommy replied noncommittally, keeping to himself that the robbers weren't after the bank bag. "Seriously?" Nancy chimed in under her breath after John left the building. "It ain't your money. Just hand it over, okay?" Outside the apartment building, Teresa White smiled to herself. She had already made 4 deliveries on her list. This was the first attempt at this address. A friendly, red-haired neighbor had informed her that the target drove a metallic gray or silver Lexus. Finally, the Lexus was parked in the driveway, with a red Lexus behind it. "Let's go, sister," Teresa whispered to herself. Inside the apartment, Caitlin and Hillary were sharing a joint. Hillary had scored some potent weed from the electronics department manager at Abdul's department store, where she worked. "Fuck! What the fuck now?" Caitlin snapped as a knock sounded at the door. She peered through the peephole and saw a smiling blonde woman waving in greeting. "Hi," the woman chirped as Caitlin opened the door. "Caitlin? Oh, I know, you probably don't remember me. I went to St. Thomas with you. Sort of. I was a grade ahead. Well, maybe just 1 grade, but hi, how are you?" I'm fine," Caitlin stammered, swinging the door wide open and squinting in the late afternoon sun. "Damn, shut the door, huh? Letting all the cold in," Hillary grumbled. "Anyway, Caitlin, what happened to you? Put on a couple of pounds there, huh? Oh, well, having kids will do that to you, am I right?" Teresa continued, oblivious to Caitlin's growing annoyance. I don't have any—" Caitlin started, but was cut off. "And you've been served," Teresa interjected, handing Caitlin a manila envelope, quickly snapping her photograph and darting down the stairs. "I've been—" Caitlin trailed off, staring at the manila envelope in her hand. "God damn, what, huh? Cold as a mother? Oh, shit. Is that what I think?" Hillary muttered. "I've been served," Caitlin mumbled, staring blankly at the envelope. "Oh, no, this ain't fucking happening," Hillary exclaimed, pulling Caitlin into the apartment and slamming the door shut. They sat at the kitchen table, poring over the documents. Caitlin comprehended the papers in her hands. She just couldn't wrap her head around the fact that Tommy was actually seeking a divorce from her. She felt completely numb as she looked at the pages. Infidelity, Hillary stated. What? Caitlin asked dumbly. He's claiming infidelity, Hillary pointed out. Well, his lawyer's an asshole. This is a no-fault state. All we need is... Caitlin mumbled, trying to focus on where Hillary was pointing on the document. Don't you have to have proof of... Oh, holy fucking shit, Hillary gasped. Well, yeah, but even with... Oh, holy fucking shit, he can play that in court? Caitlin gasped. He does that, Hillary moaned. At his home, Parker Johnson smirked as Erica, his 29-year-old wife, staggered down the hall, buzzed on several drinks and a few pills. She was an empty-headed blonde with pneumatic breasts and a willing womb. They had managed to have 2 daughters so far, and she thought she might be pregnant again. It was hard to tell, though, given her sporadic periods due to her dieting method of binge eating and purging. Mr. Parker, where your wife, eh? Sandra, the Latina nanny they'd hired, asked, smiling as she unzipped her skirt. She's down the hall. Why? Parker smiled, then cursed as his cell phone rang. God damn it, what now? Parker sighed, seeing Caitlin's phone number displayed on the screen. Chapter 8. Parker Johnson let out an audible sigh, barely concealing his frustration with Caitlin Monroe. He and his brother Brandon had already decided that once her internship concluded, their firm, Johnson, Johnson & Lambert, would not be extending an associate position to Caitlin Monroe. Despite her prestigious surname, Caitlin had consistently underwhelmed. Parker's sigh halted Caitlin mid-sentence, drawing her attention to her supervisor. He was staring absently at the ceiling, glancing at Parker's administrative assistant, whose name she could never quite remember. Caitlin found the redhead fixated on her stenographer's pad, awaiting Caitlin's next words. Is everything okay? Caitlin finally ventured. Miss Monroe, I graduated 3rd in my class out of 293 students, Parker stated evenly. Wow, remarked Debbie Dees, Parker's assistant, visibly impressed. Yes, well, Caitlin began. So, why do you think I'm unintelligent? Parker interjected sharply. Mr. Johnson, I don't think... Caitlin stumbled, her face flushing with embarrassment. You must think so, Parker continued forcefully, causing both Debbie and Caitlin to shrink back. Otherwise, you wouldn't waste my time and the firm's time with these stories of yours. One more time, Miss Monroe, one more time, Parker snarled, his anger palpable. Why is Tommy McElroy divorcing you? Why has he filed a restraining order against you and against Hillary and Patricia Monroe? He stood up, prompting Debbie to rise as well. Parker turned to gaze out the window at his 1972 Corvette. The car was a beast. He could press the accelerator and watch the speedometer climb and the gas gauge drop in almost perfect synchronization. His wife had expressed rare concern when he brought it home, questioning its practicality with 2 children and no back seat. Miss Monroe, would you feel more comfortable if it were just you and me in here, no Debbie? Parker asked, attempting to show a bit more compassion. I can leave if you'd like, Debbie offered, smiling at Caitlin. Or maybe it's me, Parker suggested. Brandon says I can be a bit overbearing. Would you prefer to have a chat with just Debbie? Caitlin, who held Debbie in low esteem, didn't see how it would help if the girl left the room, nor was she thrilled at the idea of being alone with the redhead. Caitlin closed her eyes, praying to a deity she barely believed in for help. He caught me with that cop, the one he killed, Caitlin admitted. It was me, my sister, and a couple of guys, and he walked in and caught us. Finally, Parker thought, watching Debbie's chest jiggle as she jotted down Caitlin's confession. And the restraining order? Parker prompted when it became clear that Caitlin wasn't going to elaborate. Me, my mother, and my sister. We've been trying to get him to drop the charges against Chad and Jeffrey, Caitlin continued, her eyes still tightly shut. Parker had to nudge her again. And why were Chad and Jeffrey trying to rob Mr. McElroy? He asked. Surely, since you all divided up your late father's insurance, there was no need for the, $269 in that bag? Caitlin's face turned beet red. Parker smirked as she kept her eyes shut. They weren't after the bag, she admitted. They were after Tommy's phone. It had the video of me and Jack in bed, and do you have a copy of that video? Parker asked, curious to see if Caitlin could turn any redder. No, we were hoping to get to it before he had time to download it, Caitlin said, finally opening her eyes and glancing at Debbie, who was furiously scribbling on her pad. At his office, Donald Pellichet chuckled as he saw Parker's office number on his display. Donald Pellichet here, he answered. Oh, of course, we'll be happy to share that video with you, Donald confirmed. He paused for a moment. At the mediation, he added, you cannot withhold. Parker sputtered, enraged that the black man, whom Parker saw as inferior, would not immediately comply with his demands. Tell you what, Mr. Johnson, Donald said, have your client disclose all financial records, including her inheritance from the late Harold Monroe's estate, and we'll send you a copy of He was cut off by a dial tone. Caitlin wondered again why, despite expecting an offer to join Johnson, and Lambert at the end of the semester, she wasn't allowed to use the third office that had been vacant since Sonny Lambert's dismissal. She glanced at the other intern, a smart, energetic, and completely flat-chested girl, and smirked. Both Johnson brothers had a marked preference for women with large breasts, which meant that no matter how hard Frances DeSalvo worked, she would be out of luck. Caitlin giggled to herself at her pun. The flat girl would be flat out of luck. Her amusement vanished when her phone rang again. It was Tab Properties, calling for the third time to inform her that Tommy McElroy had not paid the month's rent. Yes, she answered irritably. Frances looked up, annoyed. Parker Johnson had made it clear he disapproved of personal calls or texting during work hours, insisting that they leave their cell phones in their cars while at the office. Fine, damn it, Caitlin snapped, ending the call and getting to her feet. She didn't bother to lock her computer, as Parker insisted they do even for bathroom breaks, nor did she close out the files she was researching. She simply walked out of her cramped cubicle toward Parker's office. Caitlin seriously considered ignoring the restraining order and driving down to Clark's drive-in to confront Tommy McElroy. She and her mother had intentionally put everything in her name to ensure Tommy would be dependent on her, making it clear who was in charge. The fact that he hadn't paid the month's rent truly rankled her. Need to go on break, Caitlin informed Debbie, Parker's administrative assistant. Break's at 3:30, Debbie replied, not looking up from her online game. I'm not asking, Caitlin hissed, storming out of the office. Where does she think she's going? Parker asked. Break, Debbie answered, thrusting her chest out for emphasis. Break, Parker repeated, pursing his lips tightly. At First DeGard Bank, Caitlin waited impatiently for the teller to print out the check for the month's rent, plus the late fees the management company was charging. I cannot believe this, Caitlin muttered to herself, infuriated by the inconvenience Tommy was causing her. At the TAB Properties office, Anita Sanchez accepted the check with a pleasant smile, not mentioning that she had been in the process of filing an eviction notice. Ma'am? Anita called out as Caitlin headed toward the door. Yes? Caitlin asked the flunky behind the desk. In the future, if you're going to be late, please just call the office and let us know. We'll be happy to work something out with you, Anita said. Caitlin didn't respond and left the office. Bitch, Anita muttered under her breath, canceling the eviction notice. Caitlin didn't bother going back to the office. She drove straight to her apartment. Inside, the heat was on full blast, making the small quarters almost stifling. The air was foul, with the smell of fast food boxes and bags piled on the counter. The small kitchen garbage can was overflowing. Caitlin resolved to clean up. The stench was becoming unbearable. But first, she poured herself a drink, a stiff cola and whiskey. After the third drink, she no longer felt up to gathering the bags and boxes, nor did she feel like braving the frigid cold outside. In front of the apartment building, the mailman used his key to open the rear of the mailboxes and quickly stuffed the mail into the corresponding boxes. He grimaced in empathy as he spotted the St. Elizabeth Utilities Company envelope for apartment 2A. It had a red rim, indicating it was the recipient's last warning. St. Elizabeth Utilities sent the first bill in an envelope with a cheerful yellow rim. A week later, if they hadn't received payment either by mail or online, they sent out a blue-rimmed envelope with a friendly note saying, "We're blue, that you may have forgotten about us." The red-rimmed envelope was the final warning. In 2 days, the utilities would be shut off. To have them restored, the customer would have to pay the outstanding charges plus late fees and a reconnection fee. Whoever Kay Monroe was, they would now have to deal with those extra charges. The mailman smiled as he slipped a clothing catalog into the slot for the cute girl in apartment 3A. He had met Angela Brandt a few times, and she always flirted with him. He was happily married, but it was still an ego boost to have such an attractive young woman flirt with him. As if on cue, Angela appeared beside him. "Hi there, handsome," Angela said. "Please tell me you don't have any more bills for me. I just do not need any more bills." "Nope. Whatever this is." He smiled, handing her a flat package in her catalog. "Oh, I bet, yes. See, it's from Japan," she said excitedly. "It's a CD of all these wild dance songs." "See you. Man, it's cold out here, huh?" she chirped, dashing up the stairs. The music booming through the floor above roused Caitlin from her drunken slumber. The foul stench of the apartment hit her again, and she had a splitting headache. The heater was still running at full blast, making it hard to breathe in the stifling heat. Caitlin turned the thermostat down to 80 degrees, and the heater finally whined to a stop. She grabbed a large black plastic bag and swept all the fast food containers into it. Hundreds of roaches scurried out from underneath the refuse, causing Caitlin to scream in indignation and curse Tommy McElroy. "God damn it, guess I'm going to have to make 2 trips, Caitlin grumbled, dragging the first bag out of the apartment. On her way back from the dumpster, Caitlin checked the mail and saw the envelope from St. Elizabeth Utilities. She fought down the urge to scream. Tommy hadn't bothered to pay the electric bill either. She snarled in rage when she saw the charge, $447.18. "Oh, that motherfucker is going to pay for this shit," Caitlin vowed as she stomped up the stairs. After the second trip to the dumpster, Caitlin fixed herself a 4th drink and realized she was starving. She didn't bother checking the refrigerator. There had been no food in there earlier. "Oh, who the fuck?" Caitlin snarled as a knock sounded at her door. "Hey, girl," said Hillary, her younger sister, wrinkling her nose at the apartment's odor. "Shit, I tried calling you, but it goes to that 'we're sorry, but the number you've called is no longer in service' message. Is your phone not working?" "You are fucking kidding me!" Caitlin screamed in rage. At the diner, Tommy and Nancy traded their usual banter as they worked the grill. "I gotta tell you, you are looking a lot better these days," Nancy commented. "Yeah, losing 300 pounds will do that for you," Tommy said, just as they heard Kizzy slam into a wall. "Baby, you okay?" Nancy asked, helping the girl to her feet. "Did he just say—" Kizzy whispered to Nancy, rubbing her shoulder where she had smacked into the wall. "What?" Nancy asked, looking at the floor to make sure Kizzy hadn't slipped on any spilled soda or other hazards. "Did he say he's getting a divorce?" Kizzy whispered hotly. "Said he lost 300. Nancy agreed, confirming there was nothing on the floor that would have caused Kizzy to slip. "Shit!" Kizzy squealed. "Now I forgot what those guys wanted." "What was that all about?" Tommy asked as Kizzy dashed back out into the frigid air. "Don't know," Nancy admitted. The 2 customers laughed good-naturedly and repeated their order. Kizzy dashed back into the kitchen, yelled her order, and managed to stop in front of the soda machine without crashing. Tommy started to prepare the burgers and frowned as his cell phone chirped. "Need to get that?" Nancy asked, ready to take over. "Yeah, it's my mom," Tommy agreed, handing off the spatula. "Order up!" Nancy yelled as Tommy made his way to the small office. "What's up, Mom?" he asked. "Your mother-in-law just called me. How much do you think Mr. Pellichet would charge to get me a restraining order? The language that woman used, and she calls herself a Christian?" "I hardly think so," his mother said. Before she could continue, Tommy asked, "What did she want?" "Something about you not paying any bills. I told her, why should he pay any bills? He doesn't live there anymore. And she said," Gladys replied, "Mom, I am so sorry you had to put up with that. I'll talk to Mr. Pellichet tomorrow," Tommy promised. "I mean, I expect Caitlin to be a foul-mouthed little easy girl, and let me tell you, she hasn't disappointed me yet, that's for sure," Gladys went on. Tommy let his mother talk for another 3 minutes. It might not sound like a lot of time unless you're the one being held hostage on a cell phone. Tommy smiled as Nancy stuck her head in the door of the office. He made a yak-yak motion with his hand, and she smiled back, nodding in understanding before leaving. Mom, I am at work, okay?" Tommy finally reminded her gently. "Oh, okay, I swear. You and your father working so much is what killed him, you know," Gladys said. "Love you, Mom. See you in 3 hours," Tommy replied and ended the call. "Any man good to his mom is a good man," Nancy said, slapping an unhealthy amount of chili onto a bun. "Uh-huh. Who's that for?" Tommy asked, looking around for the waitresses. "For me," Nancy admitted, sliding 2 patties onto the bun. "I thought you were on that Weight Watchers stuff?" Tommy questioned. "Uh-huh, and starving to death too," Nancy replied, devouring half the burger in 2 bites. "Damn chew, huh?" Tommy chided. "Take your time. Chew it 10 times on each side. Bet you'd get filled up a lot faster." "Hey, Tommy, chew on this, huh?" Nancy retorted, sticking her quite plump rear end at him. "Wow. Could feed a family of 4 on that one, huh?" Tommy teased, watching as Teresa barreled in, laden down with trays. "You asshole," Nancy laughed, finishing her burger. "Shame about Melinda, huh?" Nancy asked as she stepped back behind the grill. "Yeah, hate it when we lose one, especially a good one," Tommy agreed. Chapter 9. In Conference Room C, at Johnson, Johnson, and Lambert, the 2 parties convened. Donald recognized it as a power play on Parker's part, but he shrugged it off. "That's fine. Let him pay for the coffee and bagels." He smiled at Ethel Youngblood, his receptionist. "Don't forget your green tie," Ethel reminded him. He chuckled. "I'm so glad Penny decided to hire you," he told her. "Uh-huh. Or you'd have never met my mama, right?" Ethel agreed. Inside Conference Room C, Parker, Debbie, Caitlin, and Patricia Monroe sat waiting. Donald had anticipated Parker's tactic of making them wait if they arrived early, so he timed their arrival for 1 minute past 10. "And you make sure he drops the charges against your brothers. I cannot believe—" Patricia hissed at Caitlin. At 2 minutes past 10, Cindy St. George, the firm's lobby receptionist, knocked sharply on the door and then opened it. Parker rose to his feet, his face showing annoyance. His annoyance turned to confusion as 4 women in dark business suits entered, followed by 2 young men in similar attire pushing a cart with a television set and DVD player. "What is—" Parker began, his voice heavy with disbelief as the women took seats and the men set up the television. Then Ethel entered, dressed in a dark business jacket and skirt, complemented by a dark green blouse. Soon after, Donald Pellichet and Tommy McElroy followed, both in dark suits with matching dark green ties. "What is all of this?" Parker demanded, his anger palpable. "What do you mean?" Donald replied calmly. "Is this your first divorce?" "No, this is not my first divorce," Parker spat, his face flushing red. "We are here representing Mr. McElroy," Donald explained. "Surely you expected him to have legal representation?" "Yes, but—" Parker started. "Stacy and Tracy Vickers," Donald indicated the 2 women to his right, "are forensic accountants. They have tabulated the incomes and expenditures brought into the marriage and spent during its course, including the 2 Caribbean accounts Miss Caitlin Monroe and Mrs. Patricia Monroe opened 5 months after the marriage." Patricia gasped, while Tommy smirked. "They have also prepared projections of Miss Monroe's expected earnings for the next 3 years, assuming she passes the bar," Donald continued, as the twin brunettes pulled thick folders from their briefcases. "I'll be passing—" Caitlin snapped, her glare fixed on the man. "Miss Leanne Dumas is a computer forensics expert and can testify to the validity of the video that Mr. McElroy shot, proving adultery on the part of Miss Monroe," Donald continued, gesturing towards a woman who looked young enough to be in her first year of high school. When Leanne smiled, revealing a mouthful of braces, Patricia shot a surprised look at her daughter. This was the first she was hearing about adultery. Caitlin flinched, but avoided meeting her mother's gaze. "This is my paralegal, Rebecca Montoyas." Donald indicated the fourth woman. "She has assisted me with the legal precedents, and I believe we may even be setting new precedents here. And of course, you know Ethel Youngblood, my administrative assistant." "And them," Parker pointed towards the two men standing next to the television cart. "Ben Schultz and Trevor Williams, our IT guys. They'll be displaying our evidence. They are also recording the proceedings here today," Donald explained, and the two men nodded respectfully. "Fine, fine, let's get started," Parker snapped, his face mottled with barely suppressed rage. "Wow. At our office, Ethel would have asked if anyone wanted anything to drink, any cookies or other refreshments. But I suppose, since you're still just getting started," Donald quipped. "Debbie?" Parker turned sharply towards his assistant, his frustration evident. Debbie looked at him, initially puzzled, but then understood his request. Caitlin glanced across the table at her husband. He appeared relaxed and engaged in conversation with Donald Pellichet's paralegal, who seemed to have said something amusing. A surge of rage welled up in Caitlin as Tommy smiled and leaned closer to the attractive Latin woman, whispering a response. She had spent the entire morning preparing herself, even wearing the blouse he had bought for her the previous Valentine's Day. If he had noticed, he gave no indication. Caitlin fixed Miss Montoyas with a deadly glare. Tommy McElroy belonged to her, and it did not sit well with Caitlin to see him chatting with another woman. A few minutes later, Parker announced that Miss Dees would receive a 30-cent an hour raise, acknowledging her efforts in enlisting Miss DeSalvo, the newest associate at Johnson, Johnson & Lambert, to assist her. "Now, if we may," Parker said through gritted teeth, while Donald leisurely stirred his green tea. "Before we begin, my client would like to request that all parties not directly involved in the proceedings be excused," Donald interjected, directing his gaze at Patricia Monroe. "I don't think that'll be necessary," Parker smirked, believing he had gained an advantage. Donald maintained a neutral expression, observing Caitlin squirm uncomfortably. 45 minutes later, Debbie Dees was desperate for a break. Her head throbbed from all the accounting jargon, and she was exhausted from rushing to make copies of the countless papers the legal team kept passing around. The computer jargon was equally confusing to Debbie, but she persevered as Leanne explained the steps she had taken to verify the authenticity of the video they were about to watch. Leanne detailed how she confirmed that the file was captured by Thomas McElroy's cell phone video recorder, matching the audio with the video. So, even though the actual file is only 48 seconds long, due to its high-definition resolution, it takes up 9.2 gigabytes, Leanne concluded. Additionally, there was extraneous music audio, and we've confirmed with Miss Angela Brandt that the music was coming from her apartment directly above. Leanne slid 2 discs in clear plastic covers over to Parker. "Here is a copy for your records and one for your client. I've signed a statement affirming that these were extracted from the original recording and haven't been altered in any way. Officer Mike Stevens of the Bender Police Department also witnessed the transfer of information between mediums without any manipulation," she added, sliding a paper with the Richards, Pellichet, and Jones logo at the top. "Do you require any further authentication?" Donald asked, noting Caitlin's evident distress. "No, just show the damn video," Parker sighed, his need for a restroom break becoming urgent. "Mom, please, go wait outside," Caitlin pleaded, her voice strained. "Is there a problem?" Parker's voice was sharp, directed at the tension brewing in the room. "I will not." Patricia's voice was venomous, aimed directly at Tommy. "Whatever they want, just give it to them," Caitlin interjected abruptly, then dashed out of the room before Donald could even press play on the remote control. "What?" Parker began, his confusion evident. Tommy felt a flicker of concern for his wife, a reflex after 9 years of caring for her. "Well then, I believe we're finished here," Donald stated with a smile, his confidence unwavering. "Your client has agreed to all our terms." "What in God's name?" Patricia growled, demanding to see what was on the video. "I need to confer with my client," Parker snapped, rising to his feet. "Why don't we take a 15-minute break?" Donald suggested calmly. "I'm sure some of us could use a restroom break. Ben, Leanne, I know you two are itching for a smoke, right? Fine, we'll reconvene in 15, Parker retorted, his frustration palpable. It grated on Parker Johnson deeply. This was his turf, his office building, his conference room, and yet this subordinate, this man he considered inferior, was outmaneuvering him. Donald Pellichet was not only achieving his objectives, but also undermining Parker's authority in front of his own team. Debbie wasted no time in bolting for the ladies' room as soon as the break was called. Frances followed closely behind her, her astonishment barely contained. "Oh my God," Frances whispered urgently. "I mean, seriously. I knew Dr. Pellichet was sharp, but seriously." In the men's room, Parker sighed with relief as he finally relieved his aching bladder. He couldn't help but wonder where Caitlin had disappeared to. She wasn't in the intern's office or anywhere in the lobby. "I can't use those," Tommy McElroy remarked casually as he pushed open a stall door. "What?" Parker asked, mildly confused. "Those urinals? Can't use them," Tommy explained, locking the stall door behind him. "Why not?" Parker inquired, zipping up. "Yeah, doctor's orders after I messed up my back on the job. Can't lift anything heavy," Tommy replied with a faint smile. Parker chuckled lightly at the unexpected response. Then, beneath the surface, Tommy allowed himself to feel the sadness, the ache of loss. He recognized the blouse Caitlin wore. It was a striking red silk one that accentuated her ample curves and enhanced her blonde hair and blue eyes. But today, it seemed to accentuate something else entirely, the weariness and bitterness etched into Caitlin's face. Her usually vibrant hair appeared unkempt, and her eyes, even in their swollen state, radiated resentment. Sure, her blouse highlighted her impressive bust, yet it also drew attention to her bloated midsection. For a fleeting moment, Tommy even wondered if Caitlin might be pregnant. "You okay in there?" Donald's voice echoed through the restroom. "Yeah," Tommy sighed, masking his deeper emotions. "Told you before, I just hate handling divorces." Donald sighed heavily. "God, even when you win, nobody wins." In the third stall of the women's room, Caitlin stared blankly at the closed door. This was real. Her Tommy had left her and filed for divorce. Now, with her mother and boss waiting outside, Caitlin wondered when Parker or Brandon would approach her with a job offer. They had already hired Flat Frances, as she liked to call her, and now Tommy was going to show the video of her with Jack and Jeffrey in bed. Tommy had never been good enough. He had been a diversion, a cute, willing pet while she waited for her true love. But her father had been killed before he could take her. Chad and Jeffrey had stepped in, willing to do their late father's duties. Jack had been a necessity. He had arrested Hillary with Jamaican weed, and Caitlin and Hillary had agreed to spend time with him in bed to avoid charges. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, but Jack didn't understand that. His hatred of Tommy fueled him. Tommy was supposed to be a servant, paying her bills until she discarded him. "Kai, Miss Monroe, you in there?" Frances' voice asked. "Mr. Johnson says they're waiting for you." "No, it's over," Caitlin said flatly. She flushed, although she hadn't done anything, and opened the stall door. The brightly lit bathroom had floor-to-ceiling mirrors behind the sinks. For a brief moment, Caitlin wondered who the morbidly obese woman with scraggly blonde hair and a puffy, mottled face was staring back at her. She staggered, feeling faint, and Frances gripped her hand tightly. "Miss Monroe, you all right?" Frances asked, concerned. "Do you need help?" "Oh my God," Caitlin gasped, looking again at her reflection in the mirrored wall. Frances let go of Caitlin's hand and stepped back, giving her space. Caitlin looked as if she was about to be sick. She wobbled unsteadily for a moment, then swayed over to the sinks. She splashed some cold water on her face, remembering the careful makeup she had applied earlier that morning. "Oh? Who the hell am I kidding?" she snarled at her blotchy reflection. "Excuse me?" Frances squeaked, taken aback by Caitlin's sudden outburst. "Tell Parker it's over," Caitlin sighed, defeated. "Give Tommy whatever he's asking for." In conference room C, Parker glared angrily at Donald Pellichet, then relaxed as Frances entered the room. "Women's room," Frances whispered urgently to Parker. She says give them whatever they're asking for. Mr. Johnson, Donald interjected smoothly. Any more delays? I have another mediation at 1, you know. I'll be right back, Parker snapped, hastily leaving the room. In the restroom, Caitlin looked up in distress as the door flung open and Parker Johnson stormed in. What the hell is going on? He snarled at Caitlin, his anger palpable. That video! You can't let my mom see it! Caitlin cried out desperately. It'll destroy her! I highly doubt seeing her precious daughter getting some love is going to... Parker started dismissively. But it's not just me! Caitlin interrupted, tears streaming down her face. Suddenly, the gravity of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. What? I said, growing more frustrated. Caitlin struggled to speak through her tears. It's me, Jack, my brothers, my sister. On the video, she choked out, turning away and barely avoiding vomiting into the sink. Hey! Cindy St. George exclaimed as she entered the restroom and saw Parker standing there. Don't worry about it. I'm leaving, Parker snapped, feeling queasy himself. He fought down the nausea, stared hard at Caitlin for a moment, then briskly walked out of the bathroom. You okay? Cindy asked Caitlin with concern. You don't look so good. Caitlin tried to respond, her voice trembling. What the... I'm not okay, she managed to admit before collapsing into sobs. Cindy sighed sympathetically, unsure of what to say, as Caitlin continued to cry. Caitlin suppressed her aversion to the lingering scent of cigarettes on Cindy St. George as the girl embraced her comfortingly. She strained to recall Cindy's name, someone who greeted her every morning with a cheerful good morning, and bid her good evening with the same enthusiasm. Seriously, even the worst day, it's just 24 hours, Cindy said, patting Caitlin's back. You can get through the next hour, okay? Then the one after that. Sorry, about to burst, Cindy apologized suddenly, releasing Caitlin and hurrying into a stall. Thank you, Caitlin mumbled gratefully, splashed cold water on her face once more, grabbed her purse, and left the restroom. Chapter 10. Man, that really put the final nail in the coffin, huh? Any chance of us ever getting back together is gone, Tommy sighed, his words heavy with resignation, as they waited for the funds to transfer from the offshore accounts. Donald nodded silently, understanding that post-divorce conversations often veered into reflection and closure for the client. Here you go, sir, Heidi Mowick, the branch manager of First Union Bank in Bender, Louisiana, chimed in cheerfully, handing over the confirmation of the wire transfer. Now, does your ex-wife have any access to this account? Donald inquired, pushing the paperwork towards Tommy. Nope, Tommy replied with a tight smile. I set it up to save some money to buy her a watch for Christmas. Well, you could still do that, Donald joked lightly, glancing at the substantial amount listed on the receipt. Wouldn't that be something? Tommy chuckled briefly. His expression then turned serious as Heidi waited expectantly for them to finish their business. Miss Mowick, could you look something up for me? There's a property at 3015 Highway 27. Do you happen to know who owns it? Tommy asked, his tone becoming more businesslike. 3015? Let me check on that, Heidi replied promptly, before heading off to gather the information. What's it? Donald began to ask, curious about the property on Highway 27. You like po' boys? Tommy interrupted, shifting the conversation. Po' boys? Love 'em. The best ones are at this little shack out in Jack's Creek, Donald replied with a smile. Mamas? Yeah, those are amazing, Tommy agreed enthusiastically. But keep an eye out for Tommy's opening soon. It's going to put them to shame. Tommy grinned as Heidi returned with the information they needed. Turns out, we're the ones holding the lease on that property. Did you already know that? Heidi asked. Kind of did, Tommy admitted with a nod. What would you say if I offered you 50 for it? Make it 75 and it's yours, Heidi countered. 60 after a full title search, Tommy proposed. Heidi paused, considering the offer, then shrugged. The property had sat vacant for 3 years, just a scorched slab of concrete. Recently, a young woman had leased the space, put up a metal building, and opened a dance studio. However, she struggled to keep up with expenses and often fell behind on payments. If this young man was willing to take on that challenge, Heidi saw no reason not to agree. Damn, I need you negotiating at my office, Donald snickered as Heidi scrambled to gather everything together. Anytime you're in there, on the house, here, Tommy promised. Son, never ever tell a lawyer that, Donald joked. They'll be in there every day. At her apartment, Caitlin looked around, feeling overwhelmed. She needed to decide what to pack, what would come with her to Mama's house, and what would go into the dumpster. As empty and numb as Caitlin felt inside, everything in the damned apartment could just go into the large dumpster behind the building. Mama was livid. Only one of the offshore accounts was actually Caitlin's. Patricia had only put Caitlin's name on the other one, in case anything happened to Patricia. Tommy McElroy wasn't supposed to get a penny from either of those accounts. Tommy McElroy wasn't supposed to receive a penny of any money Caitlin Monroe accrued as a powerful attorney. He was supposed to just pay the bills for her until the time Caitlin could dispose of him. But now, he would be receiving half of her income for the next 3 years. Recompense for the 3 years he'd been paying for her schooling. Recompense for the 3 years they'd been married. Caitlin sat heavily into the blue recliner, contemplating her changed circumstances. And when had she become such a blimp? The snap on her skirt threatened to bust open as she sat. Upstairs, Caitlin heard the petite redhead stride across the living room, then heard and felt music pound and thump through the floor. Anger coursed through her, and Caitlin wiggled and thrust her immense bulk out of the chair, prepared to march upstairs and pummel the inconsiderate woman. "Caitlin, damn! It's like 1:30 in the afternoon," she said, feeling weariness envelop her once again. Brandon Johnson had finally let Caitlin know that she would not be joining Johnson, and Lambert. Parker had stormed out of the building before Donald Palaszczuk. Tommy McElroy and their entourage had even completed gathering their papers. So, on top of packing and moving, on top of studying for the bar, she would also have to work on getting a resume together. Caitlin smiled sadly as she looked at the couch. She and Tommy had picked out that couch. The blue flowers matched her daddy's recliner. Then Tommy had managed to get the couch upstairs, saving himself the $50 fee O'Neill's in LG wanted for delivering it. Then they'd made love on it. The salesman had assured them that it was stain-treated. That same night, Mama, Hillary, Chad, and Jeffrey had come over to their apartment for dinner. She and Tommy had shared a secretive smile. Mama was sitting on their wet spot as she criticized the couch, the coffee table, the kitchen table they'd bought. Caitlin looked at the coffee table. Tommy would sit on that couch and use the coffee table to rest his beer, his chips and dip, and his feet, while he watched boring football or NASCAR on their 42 inches LCD television. Glancing at the television, Caitlin searched for the remote control. She honestly couldn't recall the last time she had turned the television on. She couldn't remember if she had paid the cable bill or gone through Tommy's stack of mail. Looking at the kitchen counter, she saw the stack of mail with Tommy's apartment key on top. The cable bill, unopened, was right at the top. Caitlin realized, like everything else in their apartment, it was in her name alone. So why would Tommy pay it? Overhead, the music continued to pound incessantly. Caitlin waddled into her bedroom to assess where to begin packing. "It's not like it's ever been easy," John laughed. "Yeah, suppose it hasn't been," Tommy agreed with a sigh. He glanced down at his thick wedding band, rolling it between his fingers. The weight of it felt heavier, now that everything had settled. "Thanks for letting me use your office for this, John." "No problem, Tommy. You know you're always welcome here," John replied warmly. "It's a tough spot you're in." Tommy nodded, his gaze drifting out the window to the bustling street beyond. Memories of years spent with Caitlin flashed through his mind, some bitter, some sweet, but all part of a life he was now navigating without her. "You ever think it was all a mistake?" Tommy asked quietly, almost to himself. John considered the question for a moment before answering, "Maybe, but mistakes are part of living, son. They shape us, teach us, sometimes break us. What matters is what you do next." Tommy nodded, absorbing John's words. He slipped the wedding band back into his pocket, a solemn reminder of a chapter now closed. "Yeah, Thanks, John. Any time, Tommy. Take care of yourself, John said, offering a supportive smile. As Tommy left the office, the weight of the ring in his pocket felt different. Not a burden, but a piece of a past he was ready to move beyond. You already know that, huh? John smiled wryly. And now, I guess, I'm going to remember just how hard it is, huh? Yeah. Tommy sighed, his thoughts wandering briefly to Caitlin and the turbulent morning they'd had at Johnson and Lambert. Hey, either Nancy or Harvey? Either one of them would make a damned good manager. Tommy's phone buzzed suddenly, startling him. He'd forgotten to switch it back to ring mode after the meeting. What in the hell is she doing? Tommy muttered aloud, seeing Caitlin's name light up on the screen. Only one way to find out, John suggested. Yeah, bullshit too, Tommy replied sharply, standing up. She knows I got a restraining order on her fat ass. In her apartment, Caitlin clenched her fists in frustration as Tommy's voicemail picked up. She'd always hung up in the past, but this time she waited for the beep. Tommy, her voice trembled. Why? I mean, fuck. It wasn't supposed to end this way. It really... you were supposed to just... Her voice broke, and after a moment of silence, she sobbed once before abruptly ending the call. Tommy listened to the message 3 times, feeling a pang of sadness before finally deleting it. He stared at the phone for a moment, then shook his head and slipped it back into his pocket, silently acknowledging that some wounds might never fully heal. Chapter 11. Henrietta Sundrine. Kizzy Clark stood in her dance studio, her heart heavy with the news of the property sale and impending lease negotiations. The letter from Richards, Pellichet, and Jones loomed in her mind, overshadowed by the construction of a new structure next to her beloved studio. The 7th, the day of the negotiations, felt ominous rather than lucky, especially with Tommy McElroy's departure from Clark's Drive-In also looming. Sighing deeply, Kizzy put on Haydn's Cello Concerto No. 9 in C minor and moved to the center of the floor. As the music filled the studio, she let herself be carried away by its beauty. She danced with grace and passion, soaring with the vibrant strings, twirling with the deep thrum of the cello, and gliding across the floor. "My God, that is so beautiful," a man's voice suddenly exclaimed, startling Kizzy. She spun around, expecting to see someone, but the room was empty. Just then, her class burst in, full of energy, laughter, and chatter. "LeBeau," Casey Chambly said, wrapping her arms around Kizzy's legs. "Love you too, monkey," Kizzy replied warmly, using the endearing nickname for Casey, who had special needs. The momentary beauty of the music and Casey's affection brought a fleeting sense of peace to Kizzy's troubled heart. "Hi, my God, she doesn't know Friday from Monday, but boy, she knows when it's Tuesday and Thursday," Julie Chambly, a former schoolmate and Casey's mother, chuckled. "And have you been practicing?" Kizzy asked Casey, already anticipating the answer. "Es, ma'am, I dance and dance," Casey grunted proudly. Kizzy led the group of girls through their warm-ups, offering warm smiles to those who performed well and gentle corrections to those who struggled. She then introduced new steps and forms, marveling as Casey watched intently and executed them perfectly. "And again," Kizzy instructed, and once more Casey flawlessly repeated the sequence. "Tipton, up here, please," Kizzy called out to a girl who often tried to blend into the back of the group. "Yes, ma'am?" Tipton asked nervously, her blue eyes wide with apprehension. Kizzy smiled warmly, demonstrating the first step and then guiding Tipton through it. "Then—" She couldn't suppress her smile as Casey followed, mirroring each step with perfect synchronization alongside Tipton and Kizzy. "Got it?" Kizzy smiled encouragingly at Tipton and suppressed a laugh as Casey vigorously nodded in response. "Okay, let's try it again," Kizzy called out, nodding approvingly as Tipton put in more effort this time. Though she still made some mistakes, at least there was progress. "Now, let's add that to what we already know from the top," Kizzy directed, leading them through the combined steps. "Thank you, girls. See you on Tuesday," Kizzy finally announced as the class came to an end. "I hope," she muttered quietly as the girls resumed their chatter and laughter. Thank you. Tipton's mother smiled warmly as she draped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. And thank you, she added, looking down at Casey. You're such a good teacher. No, you teach her, Casey corrected, pointing to Kizzy. Oh my God, is that child disabled? Tipton's mother whispered to her daughter as they exited the studio. Miss Kizzy, do you know what they're building right there? Morgan, another student asked, pointing to the heavy equipment at the edge of the parking lot. No, I don't, Kizzy replied with a smile plastered on her face. But it sure is going up fast, huh? Thank you, Julie called out as she ushered a reluctant Casey and an excited Andrea toward the door. Once again, Kizzy found herself alone. She put on a Schubert piece and danced around the studio, letting the music carry her thoughts away. As the melody faded, she switched off the lights, locked the door, and headed home. Hi, sweetheart, her mother greeted as Kizzy entered. Hi, where's Daddy? Kizzy asked, noticing John wasn't in his usual recliner. Training Tommy's replacement, and don't even mention that boy's name, Sabrina Clark whispered, her voice tinged with disappointment. Sabrina lowered her voice even more dramatically. Ungrateful little bastard. I took a chance on him. Taught him everything I know. Think that gets me any loyalty? No, it does not, she mimicked John's gruff tone. But Tommy's the one who showed him. Kizzy started to argue. Honey, I know, Sabrina interrupted with a laugh. And your daddy knows it too. He's just upset. He thought of Tommy as a son. Just hates losing him. Well, at least you'll always have me, Kizzy tried to lighten the mood. Oh, God, like we weren't already depressed enough, Sabrina teased gently. Whatever, Kizzy sighed and retreated to her room. It was already a hazy and humid Tuesday morning at the St. Elizabeth Parish Courthouse. Parker and Brandon Johnson urgently whispered to their two surly clients, take the deal the ADA was offering or risk a jury sentencing them to 15 to 25 years in prison. Chad and Jeffrey looked on with undisguised contempt at their lawyers. Take the deal, Caitlin urged her brothers. You'll be out in 3 to 5 years. Don't risk it, or you'll end up as someone's plaything in Angola. Remember, there was a gun and a fatality involved. But we didn't have any guns, Jeffrey protested. That was all Jack. And, Brandon countered. Fine. How much are we paying you? Chad snapped at Parker. On the 6th, several people tried to pry Tommy for information about his new job, but he just smiled and shrugged. At closing time, John Clark locked up the diner, retrieved a bottle of relatively cheap scotch, and poured a few shots. To your future. May it be as bright as the stars in the sky, John toasted. Thank you, that means a lot, Tommy replied, downing the shot and giving John a one-armed hug. Kizzy took her shot, coughed at the bitter taste, and wiped her eyes. Her eyes had already been watering before she drank the shot. She'd had a few customers ask her what was wrong. I don't want you to go, Kizzy finally wailed, clinging tightly to Tommy. It's going to be okay, Tommy assured her, rubbing her back. Trust me. Everything will be okay. Tommy hugged a few others, shook hands with a few more, and then surprised Kizzy with a quick peck on her lips before he left. Come on, I guess I'll drive you home, John joked as Kizzy sobbed. You don't look like you're in any shape to drive. In the morning, Kizzy, dressed in her most business-like outfit, declined her father's offer to accompany her and drove to Richards, Pellichet, and Jones. The receptionist, Ethel Youngblood, was very friendly and chatted pleasantly with Kizzy until Donald Pellichet buzzed her. Hi, the owner's not here yet, but I hated to keep you waiting. Are you sure you won't have some coffee? Donald said pleasantly. Coffee? God, no, I'm nervous enough as it is, Kizzy admitted. The last thing I need is caffeine. Nervous? What are you nervous about? Donald asked, sipping his green tea. Well, how about some green tea then? My girlfriend's got me drinking this stuff, and I add a teaspoon of local honey. It's supposed to be good for the immune system. How about a cup of that while we wait, huh? Sure, okay, Kizzy agreed hesitantly. Don't know what's keeping the new owner, but hey, he's the one paying for my time, right? Let him be as late as he wants to be, Donald said easily as Ethel handed Kizzy a cup of green tea. I'm here, Tommy's voice called out as he walked into the room with a cup of coffee in hand. Tommy? Kizzy gasped, dropping her cup in shock, sending shards scattering across the floor. She gasped in horror, and Donald simply smiled as Ethel, ever efficient, quickly appeared with a roll of paper towels. Oh my God, I am so sorry, Kizzy stammered, mortified. I agree, his cups are hideous. If I bring you a few more, will you drop those too? Ethel quipped. Enough about my cups, Donald interjected, dismissing the topic with a wave of his hand. Now, Tommy, what are you doing here? Kizzy asked, bewildered, as Ethel excused herself from the room. I'm the building's new owner. Didn't Mr. Pellichet tell you? Tommy replied casually. And here we go, Ethel said, returning with a fresh cup of green tea. Now, your old lease with First Union was for... here it is, $7.95 a month, plus utilities, Donald continued. Seriously? You are the new owner? Kizzy exclaimed incredulously. And Mr. McElroy had me draft a new lease, month to month, minimum of 6 months at $600 a month, with him paying water and sewage, and you responsible for all electrical, Donald elaborated. You're kidding, Kizzy burst out. On one condition, Tommy interjected, holding up a finger. What? Kizzy asked, eagerly anticipating his condition. You have to do it full time, Kizzy, Tommy said earnestly. No more waitressing one day and teaching dance the next. Embrace being a dance teacher. It's what you're meant to do. Kizzy's heart raced with a mix of disbelief and excitement as she looked from Tommy to Donald, realizing her future was suddenly taking an unexpected turn. What? I can't, Kizzy began, flustered. I watched you. God, you're a beautiful dancer, Tommy interrupted, ignoring Kizzy's protests. And teaching? I saw you pull that little girl up to the front, work with her one-on-one. You did it with such kindness, not a hint of embarrassment. You were teaching her. But Tommy, I can't, Kizzy insisted again. Kizzy, by the way, where does the name Kizzy come from? You'll never know until you try, Tommy encouraged. Uncle Tony used to call me Dizzy Kizzy Coo. He said I made him dizzy with all my dancing, Kizzy admitted. The name stuck. It's a lot better than Henrietta. Henrietta? Yeah, you're definitely a Kizzy, Tommy chuckled. And your name? It's on the lease. Oh, duh, Kizzy chuckled nervously, then grew apprehensive again. But Tommy, So what if you fail? Tommy interrupted firmly. So what if I fail? Kizzy repeated, turning to Donald, who just shrugged and sipped his tea. Then you go back to being a mediocre waitress at your dad's restaurant, Tommy said bluntly. Hey, Kizzy protested. I'm not mediocre. Kizzy, God bless, at least try, huh? Instead of just being a waitress your whole life, give it a shot. I mean, damn, you think I'm not afraid of failing? Tommy asked seriously. You? What have you ever failed at? Kizzy asked skeptically. Caitlin? Tommy responded with a wry smile. Oh, please, you never had a chance anyway, Kizzy sneered. That woman is married to one person and one person only, and unless your name is Caitlin Monroe, you don't matter. But I tried, Tommy said quietly. At least I tried. Can you say the same? Can you say you went all in? Fine. Screw it. I'm all in, Kizzy said defiantly, glaring at him. You mean it? Tommy asked, watching her resolve crumble. But what if I fail? Kizzy cried out. What then? God, what then? Then you let me take care of you, Tommy said gently. You come next door, wait tables, help me make po' boys, and let me take care of you. But you're not going to fail. You're too good a dancer to fail. That's what they're building next door? Kizzy asked, her eyes widening. Tommy's po' boys opening tomorrow, Tommy grinned. First ugly lawyer eats free. Hey, Donald protested. What about the second? Now, come on, sign the papers. Ever eaten at Bombay Cafe? Tommy asked. Kizzy quickly scribbled her name on the papers. Tommy signed his, and Ethel notarized the documents, handing Tommy and Kizzy their copies. Thank you again, Mr. Pellichet, and I'm sorry about the cup, Kizzy said, shaking Donald's hand. It happens, Donald shrugged. Truth be told, I bought those at a garage sale almost 22 years ago when I was just starting out. $3 for the whole box. Ew, I've been drinking out of a garage sale cup, Ethel exclaimed. Yours? No, Donald grinned. Found that one in some gas station bathroom. Should have seen it before I rinsed it out. Kizzy felt her heart soar as Tommy took her hand and hurried across Highway 19 to the entrance of Bombay Cafe. Ever eaten here before? Tommy asked after they were seated by Hashim. No, have you? Kizzy replied. Once, at Sweetheart's dance. That feels like ages ago, Tommy reminisced. By the way, who designed your studio? Tommy inquired after Hashim took their lunch orders. Glenn Peters. I just gave him my ideas and he charged me $2,000, Kizzy explained. Well, he did a poor job, Tommy remarked. I understand needing mirrored walls, but why not have large windows up front so people passing by can see inside and think, oh, that looks like fun, maybe I should try it, instead of it being all closed off like it is now. Yeah, I guess we didn't. Kizzy started. The last dance studio I saw had big windows with thick curtains to close it off when needed, Tommy recalled. We'll do that next time, Kizzy promised. I'll talk to Paul about it, Tommy said confidently. Hey, excuse me, about my studio? Kizzy interjected as Hashim set down their soup. No, ma'am, it's my building, Tommy replied, pulling out his copy of their lease agreement. Oh, whatever, Kizzy playfully teased. That was really nice, Kizzy said appreciatively as they left the restaurant. Well, my divorce should be final in about 90 days, Tommy mentioned casually as they hurried across Highway 19. Maybe we'll come back then, huh? Are you asking me out? Kizzy quipped as she reached her car. Don't forget, rent's due on the 1st of the month, Tommy reminded her with a smile, already getting into his mother's car. Damn it, Tommy McElroy, answer me, Kizzy yelled after him, but he was already reversing onto the highway. Epilogue. John Clark couldn't help but smile when his daughter handed him her 2 weeks' notice and confidently declared she wasn't planning to move out of his house any time soon. Pine Grove Assisted Living Facility took note that Kizzy's School of Dance was now open 5 days a week and requested to schedule their more mobile residents. Do you teach ballroom dancing as well? Tipton's mother inquired when Kizzy announced her expanded schedule. My husband and I recently went to Foxtrot's Lounge and thought it looked like so much fun. On Wednesdays and Fridays from 6 to 8, Kizzy replied with a smile. What's ballroom dancing? Tipton asked. It's like this, Kizzy explained, twirling a delighted girl around. Mama, can I do that too? Tipton asked eagerly. Only if you promise to practice your ballet more, her mother agreed. Tommy glanced up as Kizzy, dressed in a leotard, burst into his restaurant. You'll have your rent on the 1st, buddy boy. Don't you worry about that, Kizzy yelled at him before hurrying back to her studio. What was that all about? Rod Cole asked Tommy before calling out, Tron, order up. 2 roast beefs and a shrimp, Irwin confirmed, grabbing the order. That, my man, was a woman admitting a man was right, Tommy chuckled. But of course, even when she knows I'm right, she still has to make it look like I'm wrong.